that the speakers off and the microphones are muted. Just to recount some housekeeping for everyone in the room. We're using the owl, hopefully on the two screens either side. When the presentation is being shown, you'll be able to see the presentations there. So in theory, and the microphones are in front of you to be used. I think we're okay. So just double checking. Can everyone on site online hear us okay? Just give us a wave.
Yep, we can.
Okay. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Children and Families Scrutiny Committee meeting on the 18th of September here in the Central Room in Bridgewater. Thank you for everyone taking the time to arriving and taking the time to come here. Obviously, we're holding this meeting here because obviously the situation in relation to the building over in Taunton having to get out at a certain time. So we'll see how this goes and get some feedback on that. So if everyone's happy, we'll start the meeting. So the agenda packet has been published and is viewable online. If members or people that are speaking that could make reference to the page number they're talking about, if there's a specific issue in any of the reports that are published, so that everyone can find them and understand where they are. Try to improve the sound by bringing the microphone a little bit closer to. There were two supplementary packs published, which are there. That's for items 7 and 12. If I can invite everyone to speak, if I invite anyone to speak, if they John, is there you get your hand up? Can you not hear us very well?
Sorry, Chair, you sound like you're in a goldfish bowl.
Yeah, very echoey.
I'm sure you're not, but you know.
Has that changed since we started, or has that been
Almost from the first word, yeah.
Okay, so what's happening is the owl is picking up the sound from the speaker in the room. So is that any better at all, John?
That is better. Yes. Yes, it is.
Yes. Lee, you were clear as a bell initially.
Okay, so can everyone check that their microphones are off in the room, please? If you have joined it and then your speaker's muted, because that might be one of the things that the box is picking up. But I tried to keep up and if there's any problems, obviously please put your hand up again and let us know. John, thank you for that.
No problem.
So normal rules, if anyone would like to speak, please raise your hand to indicate, and then I'll make a note of it. We'll keep a count of who's looking to speak. And when I do indicate and ask you to speak, if you could please state your names so that everyone knows where they are. Just to remind you that the meeting is being recorded by the council, and obviously as the agendas are being viewed electronically, could you please make reference to the pages, etc. as we go. Just a couple of points. So before I do agenda item 1 of the apologies, just I'm pleased to say that we have a new co-optee. So sorry to embarrass you at the moment, but Mary Cox will be joining us as one of our co-opted members. This is her meeting to come and get used to us first before she becomes a full member, and it's signed off at the appropriate processes. So welcome. Thank you. And obviously, thank you to those members that are subbing in today. Really do appreciate you taking the time to come along. And thank you for anyone that's joining us online, etc. To one of our agendas. Apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. We have received apologies from Councillor Snell, for whom Councillor Dart is substituting. Apologies from Councillor Lovell, for whom Councillor Hobhouse is substituting, although Councillor Lovell is online. We have no other apologies. Councillor Ham, as I've said, Councillor Lovell and Councillor Hunt are online, and one of our co-opted members, Toby Osmond, needs to leave slightly early, Chair.
Thank you. So just to remind anyone visiting online or any new members, the way that the committee works is that committee, because of the way that the council and the legislation is set up, only those members present in the room are able to take part in any formal votes should they occur. We try not to these days, but just we can go by consensus. The co-opted members are here to speak specifically on education items. However, being the inclusive chair and council that we are, we do think, and I do like the opportunity to anyone that has any relevant point or comments are welcome to make those during the meeting. However, obviously we must remember where it is. And the way that I work is I take the members in the room first when I go out for questions, and then go to anyone on any members that are online, and then any other members for questions. It does get a bit complicated, but we get there in the end. What I will ask is, as we go through presentations, to save me having to always ask the first question, if any members do want to make a point during the meeting, then please indicate early that you want to ask a question, and I can start building this, and it gives me an indication of where we're going. And also, please don't hold your questions to the last possible minute just to try and get the last word, because I think I'm winding up and then all of a sudden 2 hands go up. It tends to play along. So if you can play fair and really close to that. Jamie?
Thank you, Chair. I just thought this was an opportune moment. Unfortunately, Fiona will be leaving the council within the next couple of months, and I'd just like to introduce a new colleague on Democratic Services, Aishi Sharma, who will be taking over gradually from Fiona over the next couple of months. So if you receive emails from Aishi, that's the reason. I just thought it was an opportune moment to introduce you to her. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the housekeeping done. So let's get on and do some business. So item 2 of our agenda is declarations of interest. Any members in the room are asked to, or members or co-opted members are asked to indicate any declarations of interest relevant to today's agenda and the reports contained in it that aren't already declared in their declarations of interest form, register of interest. That's what I was trying to remember.
Apologies, agenda. It is declared in my interest, but just to point out today that I'm an independent panel member for the Dock South West.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Item 3 of our agenda is the minutes of the last meeting. They've been circulated, so I'm looking to approve or correct. Any points of correction, members? Are you happy that I sign them as a true record? No dissent, so we would take that as a yes. Thank you. Public question time. There are no registered public questions, so and no members of the public, so thank you very much for that. We're off and running. Here we go then. Agenda item 5 of our agenda is our future work programme. Forgive me, just to outline where we're going. So the way that the agenda is laid out in our papers is a little bit so to help us as we go forward. One of the things that became clear early on in the way that this committee was run was the fact that sometimes we would lose outcomes or recommendations. So we introduced, I introduced an outcome tracker, which is there, and then that's run on a RAG basis, so red, amber, green. It then, once it goes green for one meeting, it shows that that item has been dealt with. It then falls off the list going forward. That should just leave the red and the ambers and that is an opportunity to remind us, but also it's useful for should often decide to, or anyone else decide to review our meeting agenda and minutes. They will see that we've in effect closed the circle. One of the things I like to do is that we suggest something, we get it done, we close it, and it's completed, we close the circle. But what it also does, it gives us a projection for our next few meetings. Obviously, some of the things that we're talking about today is a prerequisite for the next meeting, just to give us identification that it's coming. But also, on page 20, it shows that our agenda, draft agenda for the next meeting, there. So the question is, members, are there any points or issues that you would like us to raise or discuss in relation to the forward work programme that aren't already there? Are there any comments in relation to the forward work programme? Okay, that being said, so we'll move on to Fiona. Do you remember where we said we were meeting next? Yeah. Okay, so back into Taunton. Obviously, if we're on a meeting there for Wednesday, the time is limited, so we might have a conversation about how this works here, with the view to
Next meeting's a Monday, Chess.
next meeting. That's fine. Shut up, please. Okay, any other points in agenda item 5? No, so we move on to agenda item 6, which is our budget monitoring. Who's presenting this one? Christine, are you there?
She's lost
She's on the, I apologise, thank you. Joe and Siobhan, thank you for taking that. Over to you.
Thank you. So I'm Siobhan Cleverly, Finance Service Manager for Children's Services.
Yeah, I'm Joe Curry. I'm the Finance Service Manager for Education.
So just gonna,
Yeah.
so just gonna run through, the month 4 position for Children's Services. So the first slide just shows the overall position for, children and families, broken down, commissioning, performance, education and transport. So, but since month 3, we've had an overall movement of £1 million. The majority of that is in children and families of 1.2 million. Small increase in commissioning and performance of 0.1, and we've seen a favourable movement in education of 300,000. So overall, we've got a variance at month 4 of 6.4 million adverse variance. Moving on to external placements, which makes up the majority of the pressure within children and families. We've seen an increase from month 3 of 800,000. So the overall variance for external placements is 9.9 million at month 4. This doesn't include the budget that we've kept aside for the additional inflation budget of 2.8 million. So residential placements, we've got a gross pressure of 4.8 million, which net pressure of 6.7 million of DSG and NHS income, where we're not receiving the income that we had budgeted for those areas. Unregistered placements, £1.8 million gross pressure. So the changes, movements that we've seen since month 3 against the specific placement types, we've seen £500,000 increase for 16 plus ported accommodations, which the majority of that is around a combination of new placements, extension of placements, and some increase in the weekly cost of placements. We've also seen a £500,000 increase in unregistered placements and a £400,000 increase for secure, which is just for one young person placed, but we've needed to block beds for that particular young person. So just a breakdown of the residential placements and unregistered placements. Although the residential placements have dropped slightly since the last report, down to 95. This is just looking at residential placements and doesn't include Homes and Horizons placements. So we're down at 95. However, we are still significantly above the budgeted placements of 73. We are seeing, though, the average weekly cost at the moment is still below the budgeted average weekly cost, although we have seen recently some more high cost residential placements coming in. So we may start to see that increase over the next few months. Unregistered placements have also reduced. We're now at 5 as at the end of July, with the FTE for the year projected at 3, because obviously these placements are quite short-term placements. So the full year projection for unregistered is 3. Budgeted placements are 1. And children looked after numbers over the last 12 months. So from July 23, we've seen an increase over that 12 months of 53, which is majority of that is reflected in the high cost residential placements, so in that high spend there. However, we have seen over the last month a reduction in CLA numbers, which I'm sure the service will be able to give a little bit more detail on that reduction in CLA.
Okay, so for education and the transport forecast for month 4, that's showing a £300,000 favourable variance from month 3. There isn't a huge amount to report here. The favourable variance on education is largely because we transferred a team that was overspent out of the service, actually moved across to children and families. So that's the reason for the favourable variance on education. On transport, we should have a much better picture at month 6 of the number of children we're transporting for the rest of the academic year. So we should have a more sort of robust forecast for transport come month 6. And there isn't a lot to report really in terms of movements from month 3 on transport. So the final slide is for the dedicated schools grant high needs block. There isn't a lot of good news on this slide, unfortunately. I think actually is, yeah, pops up. Yeah, there we go. So the forecast is showing now a 5.4 million unfavourable or adverse variance, sorry, I should say, from the budget of 18.9 million. So that's an increase of 1.2 million from the month 3 forecast. And there are two main reasons for this. There is the pressure on independent non-maintained school placements. We actually put in our budget a figure of 415, and we're forecasting around 449 for the full year. And similarly, there's a pressure on mainstream top-ups and costed plans that continues to grow. And that's largely due to the continued increase in the education and healthcare plans that we're issuing in Somerset. One of the pieces of work we're doing in finance, along with the service, is to put together a more sort of robust forecasting and demand modelling for the high needs blocks. So that's something we're working on and hoping to put in place during this financial year. That's it. We did produce a list of acronyms for reference, which I think you're asked for.
Excellent.
Thank you. Members, if you could indicate you want to ask a question. As far as I always get confused when it's adverse pressures, positive pressures. It's overspend and underspend in my head. So
I think we are looking to change it's just getting it out of our own heads. We are looking to change the terminology.
thank you. Councillor Happy, Andy, do you want to go?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for the list of acronyms. I did use that quite extensively when I was reading these papers. I know at past meetings we've had issues where Homes and Horizons have been delayed due to office capacity and what have you, and I know that's causing pressures on the budget as well. Have we got any more an update basically on that? Have we managed to get through the delays being caused by capacity issues, or are we still being held up?
There is still some hold up. So we have, in the last 2 weeks, opened 2 more homes. So those have been pushed through. So we've opened homes 6 and 7. We've now got an issue with Ofsted delays, in that Ofsted haven't got the capacity to do the registration of those homes currently. So we have opened them without the Ofsted registration. And although Ofsted can't agree that, they're remaining neutral about the fact that we've done that. That has moved children into permanent homes, which is amazing for them. And in terms of the cost pressures, the Homes and Horizons staff are costed into base, into the reserve. So that has reduced the cost pressures for those children. So if we assume that those homes will register, because I'm confident they will once Ofsted register them, that takes 2 more children out of the unregistered provision. So as Siobhan said, we had 5, so we're now down to 3 effectively. And we have another child who's due to move this week, so we should be down to 2, hopefully, in the next few weeks. In terms of moving forward, we still have some issues in relation to planning officers being available, particularly in relation to annexes, which are sort of separate buildings on the grounds of the children's homes, which are for emergency provision. That would take children who would normally go into unregistered provision, and they would be supported by Homes and Horizons. You basically use it for an assessment, and then they would move into a Homes and Horizons home to assess their needs. But it is registered provision. There's some planning officers are struggling to get through that work, and there's one additional, what we call a pod, which is a separate 1-bedroom building in the grounds of one of the children's homes, which is for 16 or 17-year-olds who are particularly vulnerable, so that they're it's supported by the staff of the children's home, but have a developing independence. So the annexes and the pods and the additional home 8 will all take children who are currently in accommodation that probably isn't as suitable as it could be. It will bring them back to Somerset, bring them home, and will reduce costs. So yes, there are some additional delays. I think we've modelled that the delays so far are, is it 1 million now? In terms of the pressure? So the pressure on the budget in terms of the lack of savings, if you like, for Homes and Horizons is about £1 million that we haven't been able to make because of the delay from the system around.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. My question is quite simple, one actually. It's more about detail, but that's, while I've got the mic, I must say that's quite disturbing with the situation with planning. So because of the lack of essentially capability of our planning department, it's probably costing us a small fortune. And ironically, that small fortune could then probably be rolled over into the planning department, or we'd save some money and maybe we'd have some more money for the planning department. We seem to be in a vicious catch-22 situation there. And, it's not someone just wanting planning permission for small go. It's just quite vital and affects people's lives. And I think we should make sure the portfolio holder for planning is aware of the situation. So I don't know if they will be. On my question was quite simple. You mentioned, and thank you, it was quite detailed, and I was trying to keep up on, I still think myself as a newbie when it comes to this committee. But you said 16 plus supported accommodation. Just remind me, is that 16 plus to what age? And then I may just come back.
So that's for the 16, 17-year-olds in supported accommodation.
Yeah. Okay. So, and is that being you say that was up £500,000? Is there a particular reason that we know that?
Yeah, so it's a combination of some extension to placements in our monitoring. There's been some movement of placements, so where we've had some residential placements step down into 16, 17 supported accommodation, and we've also had some increases in the weekly costs of some placements. So it's a combination of all of those things together.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that as well? The other issue there is flow. So when children come out of residential care or fostering and need a supported accommodation, semi-independent accommodation, we have a contract with the YMCA. It's called Thrive 16 Plus. So most young people who need semi-supported in accommodation will be able to go into the Thrive 16 Plus contract, which is a very good value for money contract. Some young people who've got very complex needs at that age, who could manage in supported accommodation but need additional support, go into independent, semi-independent support, so not in that contract. That does cost a little bit more. We have a backlog that we can't put more young people in 516 plus contract because of the lack of social housing. So when young people get to 18, 20, 21, because that accommodation Thrive 16 plus will go through to 25 for young people who are homeless effectively and care leavers to the age of 21, and then they transfer. There is no social housing. So actually they're stuck in that accommodation because there's nowhere for them to go. It's also very difficult to access private rented accommodation at a rate that young people can afford because of all the things that are good for the economy in terms of the developments locally. But that does mean that there's a lack of private accommodation at a reasonable rate. So in terms of young people moving out, which we had anticipated, the numbers moving out are not moving out at the rate we anticipated. So we haven't got access to the accommodation for the young people coming in. So young people are either staying in residential care, which is at a higher cost than we'd anticipated because we anticipated them moving into semi-independence at lower cost, or they're going into specialist semi-independence, which is not as expensive as residential, but is more expensive than the Thrive 16 plus contract. So the whole system around us is a bit silted up, which is impacting on our ability to make the savings by moving young people appropriately into the right type of provision at the right time. But it's complicated, aren't it?
Thank you. I'm half tempted to say, can you say that one again?
Would it be helpful to have some perhaps a paragraph or something that we could, so that I could make sure that that's in the minutes? So rather than a minuted comment about what we just discussed, if we get a response from the service, then that would make that a little bit clearer. And perhaps if that was shared separately, we could share that as in between meetings.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got Francis next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were 2 or 3 things I wanted to ask about. One is moving on from the needs you mentioned, just moving on from the points you just made.
Francis, if you move the microphone forward.
Sorry. Are children well connected with I know there are plans potentially for housing, social housing coming from the housing revenue account, whatever. Have we got our needs for young people, single young people mostly, well known and understood in that conversation? That's the first question. The next one is, following on from Marcus, aware of the, and then the planning needs, presumably also legal and property needs. In what ways are we able to support the system, or do we need to support the system going forward? What are the ideas for resolving this in our current emergency? And the third one is, our numbers of children in, well, there's 3 and 4, numbers of children in care going up, have gone up a lot. Are we still below national average? Are we still content, as we have been, that and other outside people looking at us have been saying that we have the right children in care? Are we still in that place? And if that is so, and the fact that we are below does tell us, below what we would expect, does tell us that we'd be spending an awful lot more money if we weren't doing actually a good job in keeping them out of care. And the last one has escaped me, Mr. Chairman. If I remember it, can I come back to it?
I think one of those questions was around CLA numbers. We've got that coming up as agenda item 8.
Okay.
So rather than get caught up in that one
Yeah.
now, that gets rid of one of them, but do you want to?
So that I'll answer the ones I can remember. You'll have to remind me if I miss any.
Young people in house building.
So young people in house building, yeah, housing are aware that young people need social housing. They are on a list of quite a long list of other groups who are also a priority group. Social housing being built is not going to happen tomorrow. So yes, they are on that list, people who are a priority group, but it's not a quick fix, because social housing needs to be built, developed, etc., in order to be able to be available to anybody, let alone young people. In terms of what we're doing to try and make sure we've got the right resources, particularly around Homes and Horizons, I have just the last few weeks funded from the Homes and Horizons Reserve a 6-month interim planning role. Because there is no capacity in planning. It's a bit of a punt on the basis that there is a national shortage of planners. So it's not that planning are not doing the work because they don't want to, or that they haven't got the capacity because there are no planners available. But I did offer to do this on the basis that what we're asking for is a 6-month period where we know we've got some really intensive work to do around Homes and Horizons and planning issues. And we thought that putting out a contract for a 6-month interim planning officer focused on children's services planning might appeal to somebody as a very sort of niche, bespoke piece of work. So it's a bit of a desperate attempt to get sufficient capacity to get us through this period, because, as Councillor Travis says, actually by not doing this, we're causing greater financial pressure in children's services. If we could get this through and get these things done by having a planning officer who's actually able to do this work and to prioritise it, it would give children permanent homes and also make greater savings. So it felt like a pragmatic response to a very difficult problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've remembered my last question. May I ask it? It was the relationship between the overspend in INMS places, the independent non-maintained special schools, and costed plans. In order to get the INMS places down, are we going to need to increase the costed plans, and is there going to be a balance that goes the right way?
That's quite a complicated question. I would suggest it might be helpful to have an item on a scrutiny agenda in relation to the public consultation currently in relation to banding, and how, I think we've talked about this to some degree before, but there's a lot more detail in that consultation and what we're intending to do. So the issue at the moment relating to INMS placements is we have a significant number of young people who did not have a school place, who needed a specialist school place. Because we were struggling to find capacity in both the special school system and in the INMS system. There is now some capacity in the INMS system. Obviously, that is at quite a high cost, but if it's the right provision for that child, we need to do that. So that has increased the number of children in INMS. We're obviously also trying to support mainstream schools to retain children, include children in mainstream schools. where children have a quite significant level of need, that obviously requires additional resource, sometimes a teaching assistant, sometimes specialist resources. So the costed plans are being put in place at to some degree, at a higher level for some children to enable that to happen, for those children to remain in school. Our aim is for more children to be able to be included in mainstream school in their local community where that's appropriate. So that the banding consultation that's currently out is looking at, amongst other things, rebalancing the finances available to different types of schools for different needs of children to try and support more children to be in mainstream school. If we can get that right and implement that appropriately, that will reduce the need for INMS school places and increase the number of children who can be in mainstream schools, which will be better for those children and will over time reduce the pressure on the INMS element of the DSG grant, Dedicated Schools grant, and therefore reduce the pressure of the overspend effectively on that grant. But again, that's probably several years to get to the point where we need it to be.
Would you share the consultation with Fiona? The link to where the consultation, so that we can have a look at it and with a view to, if you do you think the committee would benefit from looking at it to form a response or for looking at it to see the direction of travel?
You're welcome to do it. It's a public consultation. It's on the council's consultation website page. So Fiona should be able to pick that up and share that with members here. If you wanted to write a response as a committee, that'd be absolutely fine. And if you want to just read it to understand it better, obviously that's your decision. We can bring the outcomes of that consultation to the committee so that you understand what the public response has been to that, if that's helpful.
I misunderstood. You said the committee may want to look at in your response. So I was just trying to understand what you wanted us to look at.
I suppose I was talking about you might want to look at that as a matter of interest in terms of individually, or you might want that to be brought to the committee at a later date in terms of the consultation itself and the outcomes of that consultation. We have previously brought the broad outline of that consultation in terms of what's in the consultation now to the committee, but you might individually want to look at the consultation for detail or bring it back to this committee at some point for the outcomes of that consultation and where we intend to go.
Where does that fit within the review of SEND funding? That's separate.
That's involved in that consultation. That's a sort of subsection of the consultation.
We'll share that information with the committee so that they can have a look at it and feedback. And if you think it's something that we need to come back on, then please let us know in relation to that. Thank you, Francis. That was lots of points covered there. I don't know. To me, the fact that our children's services are having to think outside of the box to influence or to help with planning issues, it's great that we're able to think outside the box. It's frustrating that we're having to, and that may bring another point to us because the members have heard me say it before, but by forming a unitary should in theory shortcut or make the journey from identifying a problem to solving the problem shorter, but we're caught up in the multiple issues there. So members may want to make a point on that at some point, but it's interesting. We need to find a way to help. The purpose of the committee, one of the is to help add some weight to the children's services to get things done. So we may want to come back on that. I've got a couple of other members and I've got a couple of points myself. Dixie.
Thanks, Chair. I think I'm subbing for Jenny, so I am new to this committee, so forgive me if I kind of say something that you've discussed previously. I think it's really interesting hearing responses, Claire, and what strikes me is that Children's Services it's an entity and it's got a budget that it needs to cope with, but it's definitely affected by pressures on the rest of the council, but also national pressures. And, in a way, the reason why there is so much pressure on Children's Services is about the wider picture, really, with families, children, social pressure, all housing, social housing, all of those things. And it sounds like that move to that, whether it works or not, but that kind of pragmatic approach to supporting planning a bit. That sounds like a really good move to me. I've just got a couple of questions. One question I'll kind of defer to the deep dive because it's about that spike in care for children, whether that's like to do with increased reporting or an actual increase. And I know we're going to look at that a bit more in a bit more detail shortly. My question really is about that budget line and how it's kind of consistently below the actual spend. And so my question is that because that budget line has been brought down because we're attempting to do savings, or is it because we're kind of we've been taken by surprise by the actual cost and the need? That's one question. And my other question, which is also about money, is with the Labour government having introduced VAT to independent school fees, will we be exempt from that with our children who are in the independent sector or not? We really should be, I think, but they've got the HCP.
So I can do the second one first, and that's an easy answer. Yes, we are exempt. If the child's got an education, health and care plan, which is our SEND cohort of children largely, that we would only place a child in an independent or maintained school if they had an education health care plan, and those children are exempt, so those costs are exempt. And the other question was about baseline, wasn't it?
The budget.
Yeah. So every year we model what we think is going to happen into the future, in terms of the forward year, in terms of the type of children in our care, the type of placements we're going to need, the type of situations that we have for those children. It is, I would describe, as a bit of a dark art, because although we have some demographics and some trending that we can look at in terms of how things are moving forward, things change a lot. Look at the pandemic, the impact of the pandemic, the impact of cost of living crisis, impact of energy prices, etc. All those do have an impact, but it's difficult to extrapolate what the direct impact is of each of those things over a 12-18 month period. So this year, for this current year, so for 24-25, we did more in-depth modelling. Our finance actually employed a specialist for a period to come in and help us with that modelling to make sure that we were as confident as we could be that we were going to be as near to budget as we could be, and already we're off target. So I think what happens when we have looked at that in terms of we are every year, as you say, we're off budget, and every year we're roughly the same at the same point each year. We're roughly at the same place in terms of how far over budget we are. What happens every year is that you get these different demographic issues. So last year we had a real spike in boys who were involved in county line. That spiked the number of children coming into care at very high cost. This year we have had a further, so we sort of anticipated that continuing, I think. This year we've had different demographic issues in terms of other children coming into care in a different age group that we would not necessarily have expected. And some of that is not, you can't predict it. It's things happen in communities and families. If you get a couple of large families of children coming into care for some reason that is not predictable, that's a huge cost. 4 or 5 children coming into care is a lot of money, basically. Probably over £1 million, several £1 million if they're in residential care each year, that is not predictable. So I am confident that the work we did with finance, and things for all was confident as well, the work we did for modelling it this year, that we were as close as we could be to what we thought was going to happen. What we thought was going to happen isn't what has happened. So there are some things that go better, if you like. So some of it does mitigate slightly, but unfortunately, as you saw in Siobhan's slides, the highest increase in cost is in residential care. And the reason for that is because children's complexity of need, that actually they're so complex that some of those children would not be suitable to be in foster care because of the risks that they could present themselves and other people. They need a staff group around them. And residential care costs are rocketing, they're sky high. There was an article on the BBC News this morning, on the BBC, if you read that, about residential care in the Northwest and the cost of that and unregistered placements. That's crazy. That's our situation. We're in that situation just like every other local authority in the country. And there are private equity-backed companies who demand 25% profit on the cost, which is baked into what the local authority paid for placement. So, you know, as those things are outside our control, we're trying to work with them and trying to change the market. Homes on Horizon is an example of that, in terms of trying to develop our own provision to try and get a better footing in the market so that we can actually manage costs better for our children and have them more local. But it is a very, very difficult market to work in. And the other aspect, I suppose, is in relation to residential care, is where children don't need residential care and there are no foster carers for them. So nationally, the reduction in foster carers has been very significant over the last few years. We were at that level or worse in terms of reduction for a couple of years. In the last year, we've bucked the trend. The national trend is still down. We have increased our foster carers over the last 12 months, and the trajectory is that we will continue to increase. But the type of people coming forward to foster is not necessarily completely matched to the type of children who need foster care. So historically, people would say, I'm going to be a foster carer for 20, 30 years, look after a lot of children long term. Currently, there are very few people who want to do that. There are more people who want to foster short term, do weekends, holidays, a couple of weeks every now and again. Children's lives don't run like that. But that is the resource we have. So we have to try and work out how we can best use that resource to try and prevent children needing longer term care largely. But there are a cohort of children, about a third of those 95 children in residential care need a foster placement. They don't need to be in residential care at all. But there is nothing in our capacity or in the independent fostering market capacity currently that can move those children. Sorry, it's a long answer.
Thank you. And it's a message that's why we welcome substitutes councillors, because the more we can get the message out to all of our councillors, the process, and it would be remiss of me not to do the advert for fostering at the same time. It is one of the things that we as a council can do, is when we have conversations with members of the public, with residents that we're talking to, remind them of the fact that both fostering, adoption, governor boards are ways that you can help young people thrive and get better, get a better life for the cards that they've been dealt. Thank you for that. Thank you for the question. I've got a couple more. So I've got online. I've got councillor level. So Martin, I'll bring you in now. Andy just did here, but I'd like to cover the questions. I'm just conscious of time. That's all. So Martin, if you want to come in, sir.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. My apologies, everybody, that I'm not with you this morning, and thank you to Councillor Hobhouse for subbing for me. My question is a follow-up to one raised by Councillor Nicholson, focusing on the DSG high needs block mainstream Topham costed plans. From what Claire said, this is obviously a long-term project. That to get to the grips with this one. I was wondering if this, I'd certainly like more detail on it, but I'm wondering if this could be the subject of a deep dive in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. One of my points was about the DSG, and I might be able to help you a little bit in that. One of the things I was saying, we've had conversations previously. I was at the speak to a media about the DSG, the deficit management plan that's being put in place. For those new members here, the designated schools grant is the deficit is growing rather quickly. And we've identified that as a concern for the council, particularly as the statutory override, which is in place, the get out of jail free card from the government, statutory override. They give you permission to overspend, and they'll cover that. It's likely to end in March 2026. So sooner rather than later. So one of the things that the committee has done is asked the service to. The executive has done is also has asked us to look at the DSG and then put in place a deficit management plan. So one of the things I was going to suggest was to ask yourself then, Claire, or Amelia, where we are with the deficit management plan. Is it in place? Is it starting to come? And would it be worth? When would it be worth bringing it to this committee to look at? I hope that, Martin, I hope that's helpful. The sort of answer should cover your question. If it doesn't, then come back in, but I'll let Claire come back.
That's fine, Chair. Thank you.
I think it would be helpful for the committee to look at the deficit management plan. I don't know if you've got a think would be sensible.
Might be early in this.
January.
Yeah.
So if we said in January,
Is that? The reason I'm verbalizing it now and I'm slightly, if we were to ask for it sooner, would that help put it in, the wheels move? Or is January a realistic?
I think some of it is depends. So the reason why I think we're saying January is that because we're doing the public consultation at the moment on some of the measures that we could take, if we take those, if the consultation is positive and we decide to take those measures, that will have a significant impact over time on the deficit management plan. So it would probably be helpful, and the consultation finishes in December, November, at the end of October. So by the time we get to January, we'll have a much clearer picture of the impact that we could see from the changing of the way we deliver funding for SEND on the basis of the consultation that we finished, being able to implement it. If we brought it before then, we'd be giving you various scenarios about, well, if this happened and that happened, this is what it might look like, which is interesting, but possibly not as helpful as it would be to give you a clear way forward.
Our current meeting list has a December and a February.
Okay.
I personally, and I think the committee are greatly concerned and would like to understand better what's going on. So if I was to say December is that going to cause problems? Can we, I'll tell you what we'll do. I make it, rather than have a negotiation now, members, are you happy to delegate to the vice chair and myself to have a conversation and figure out, but to have the designated schools grant and the deficit management as an important issue to bring back at the soonest opportunity?
Yeah.
We'll have the conversation outside.
So can I just say, Joe's just reminded me, the reason that it's got to go through the executive for decision once the consultation's finished, it goes to executive in December. So if the committee is after the executive decision in December, that probably would be possible on the basis that we would then have a very clear way forward. We could present you the way forward we would like before the executive, but if the executive don't agree with it, that may not be the way forward that we have.
Okay, I'll use the scrutiny trump card. I would like scrutiny's opinion on it to be included when it goes to executive.
Absolutely.
Sorry, we'll have the conversation. We'll have the conversation outside. But I would, as I say, and I'm pretty certain that most of the committee would support me in that. We would prefer that the scrutiny's opinion was included in that. If it, and people are waving at me. Is it on this issue? Okay, Ruth, did you want?
Sorry, Lena. I think Francis just unplugged me now. Fine. Just that Francis and I was saying that if necessary, would we need to have an extra meeting to discuss it because it's such an important issue?
No, so for those that didn't hear online, Ruth just said that we'll discuss it, but if necessary, the options for a extraordinary meeting of the committees to allow us to fit into that process will be something that we consider. So yes, thank you. Bear with me. I've just got to go. I'm going to come in now. I've dealt with the list I have. There's people are waving at me, but I'll just do a couple of points for myself before we go. The DSG was one of the ones. And ladies, I'm just going to go back over to on page 32, or the residential placements month 4 slide that you put up. And forgive me, if I did for 2024-25 residential placements, it's showing about 95 now, and we're budgeted for 73. But did I get it right that you said this doesn't include the Homes and Horizons ones? So the question would be why?
Yeah, so these placements are just looking at the residential external placements that we've got, not the Homes and Horizons placements, which we report separately.
Okay, that because they're funded separately.
Yeah, so we've got a separate line on. Yeah, so if you look at the previous slide where we've got the breakdown of external placements by placement type, we've got a separate line on there for Homes and Horizons, which is currently coming in on budget in terms of the base budget that we have set for those homes.
Okay, it's just that young people in placements in my head was a number. And if you're saying that it's broken down separately, then I'll figure that out myself. But okay, so yeah, so the external placements budget that you've shown on page 31 is all of the separate areas, and within that are the numbers.
Yeah, so on that, the previous slide, you've got the breakdown of placement types. So you've got the residential placements budget on the top line there, which is what the 95 feeds into. And then a few lines down, you've got homes and horizons of 5.9, which at this point, there were 10 placements at the point of us doing this.
Thank you for the clarification. I heard it and I wasn't too sure. I've got two members indicating, are they quick questions or points? So start over there then, and then go back to Andy, please.
I'll do this very quick. So question for Claire, really. I'm going to take you back a few paragraphs because I was waiting for chance to actually speak. You mentioned boys, so I think all county lines. Do we have any figures for reoffending for county lines? For example, 15-year-old boy in whatever the case may be, 3 or 4 weeks later, the cop and same thing with reoffending. Right? Secondly, isn't legal age, and I think I'm right, I'm not sure, for legal responsibility 12, is that right? Or was it 10? Good me. All right. Okay. If it's 10, why is this a council problem in the first place? Because if you're doing county lines, you call the police, it's a police problem. So why I don't get this, why the council's involved in it at all. You just run that past me.
So county lines, for people who don't know, is basically a drug dealing large scale operation that is about drugs being dealt through phone lines in largely in large geographical areas outside London. And we are, unfortunately, we have quite a high number because we have very good transport links to London and to the northwest and to Bristol, where some of these gangs are based. In terms of why we're involved in it, the young people who get involved in county lines initially they're exploited basically by these gangs. So they are given initially a phone, probably some nice clothes, trainers, some money, and then pulled into this drug dealing and then get into a place where they can't get out or they find it very difficult to get out. In terms of the offending, so we don't really want to criminalise the children and the police don't want to criminalise effectively the young people who are involved in those county lines gangs, because they're a victim of those gangs as much as they are also dealing some of those drugs or running those drugs. The issue in terms of why the council gets involved is because that in itself is a safeguarding issue, that those young people are being exploited. And when we have those young people coming into care, it's largely because they have got so enmeshed in that culture that they are becoming violent or they are very distressed and anxious about that, and it's very difficult for their family to care for them. We rarely, in those situations, would go to court and say a child needed to be removed from home. It's quite often families saying that this is too dangerous. There are drug gangs, smashing my windows out the front of my house. I'm really worried for my child. Please put my child somewhere where they can be safe because I'm worried that something terrible is going to happen to them. So it's families asking for children to be received into care. And it is a safeguarding issue. Those children are seriously at risk in terms of the behaviour of those gangs. And also their families can be at risk. If people know that they are living in that household with the younger children or other people in that household, it puts the other people in that household at risk. And those young people do come into our care. It's quite, addictive is the wrong word, but once young people are into it, it's very difficult for them to understand they're being exploited because of what they would see at the time as some benefits in terms of clothes, etc., goods. It's only as they get older that young people realise that they've been exploited, that they've got into criminality that they wouldn't otherwise have got into. It's an awful lot of violence, an awful lot of dangerous behaviour, some sexual exploitation as well, quite often involved, as well as criminal exploitation. It's a really nasty, dark world to be in, and children are highly at risk if they're getting involved in it.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Mine goes back to I'm quite concerned about 30% of our residential children should be in foster care and not in residential. Is there any evidence that show the longer that they're in residential care, they become less able to go into foster care and thus then causes additional pressures on the budget?
Yes.
The short answer is yes. Do you want a slightly longer one? So I think when children get into residential care, when they're placed in residential care, a residential care environment, a lot of residential providers look after children very well. But it is, to be fair, even if it's only 2 or 3 children, it is an institution. You are not being cared for in a family environment. You have staff teams who are constantly rotating. You'll have staff teams, some of whom are stable, some of whom are not. So you constantly have different people looking after you. You're living with other young people who probably, because they're in residential care like you are, may have more complex problems than children in foster care. You might learn things that we wouldn't want you to learn from the other young people in that situation. And when a residential placement breaks down for some reason in terms of a residential provider asking for a child to move on, that's obviously really distressing for a child because they're being rejected. And once you've been rejected once, a lot of children start to develop I'm going to reject you before you reject me, because that's a survival skill. That's how you survive in life. And that then becomes quite difficult, particularly if you then move to a foster family who probably haven't got they won't have the staff around them in the same way as in a residential environment to manage challenging behaviour, self-harm in that way in a family environment. So yes, once you've got into the residential care system, we need to try and get you out really quickly back into a family so that those things that residential has its positives for children who are very complex, but if you don't need it, it's not the right environment and it can be more damaging in terms of trying to get you back into a family.
Thank you. And that was the budget monthly monitoring. I think we pretty much covered most of the corners of children's services in that one. But thank you, members, for your engagement. And I'm not sure how I can summarise it, but we covered so much. But there are within the Somerset's Children's Service, we have so many good things that are happening as well as so many bad. And Homes Horizon is one of the positive ones that's going to, and I'll say out loud that we need to be careful we're not pinning all of our things to one mast, one option. We don't to overload them and move forward, but the work that's going on there, our budget is troublesome, and it will continue to be so. And I just wanted to thank members often for the response of the members for taking the time to ask the question. So if there's no other questions related to this, we'll move on. Thank you, ladies, for your time. Moving on then, agenda item number 7, which is our joint targeted area inspection serious action plan. For those that we have some new members in the room, but there are some members that haven't been to a committee meeting before. We had an update on this previously, and one of the things that we asked for was to come back so that we could have a better understanding of what's going on and how the action plan is being put in, and how people, how the stakeholders and partners are working together in it. There.
Thank you, Chair. I was expecting Sarah Ash to be here from the IPD. Is she online? Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah, I'm here, Claire. Good morning, everybody.
Thanks, Sarah. If somebody can share these slides, could you leave this to a meeting? So I need to start with a couple of apologies. So I had omitted to mention to my colleagues in health and the police at the last meeting that they needed to attend this one alongside me. So it was only a couple of weeks ago that I went back to them through Fiona and said, could you attend this meeting? Health obviously have been able to field Sarah, which is great. Thanks, Sarah, for being here. But unfortunately, the police at very short notice were not able to field somebody to attend this meeting. That is entirely my responsibility and not any reflection on the police. And the second issue is in relation to the plan. Well, I did say last time that I hoped at this meeting to be able to present the whole plan. Unfortunately, I had forgotten that the plan has to be signed off by Ofsted before it can be a public document. It hasn't yet been submitted to Ofsted. So what we've done instead is provided a document that gives you the key headlines and some of the detail in terms of what the plan it has in it and what we're trying to achieve through this plan, to give the committee the opportunity to challenge and scrutinise the issues that are being put in the plan and some of the timescales, so that we can incorporate that into the final submission to Ofsted. Ofsted do with the other Austin is the lead inspectorate, with the other inspectorate to look at the plan. They do have the opportunity to reject our plan and say that they don't feel it's sufficient to address the issues that we've raised. They have raised an inspection. So once we have submitted that, obviously we'll keep the committee updated in terms of their acceptance or not of the plan and what we've needed to change if they require us to do so. So as these slides say, the first slide, sorry, if somebody could move it on, that we've presented the headline findings of the JTI inspection in August. For those people who weren't at that committee meeting, this was a joint inspection with the police, health and probation services for youth justice for children in relation to serious youth violence in Somerset, which is very relevant as Councillor Hendry has described in terms of county lines and drug dealing activity particularly. Since then, we have had this multi-agency accident plan in development, and we are going to submit it. We have a deadline by the 25th of October. We hope to submit it before that. There are still some issues to be ironed out, which are taking a little while to get through. So in terms of the key headings in the plan, the first one is around responsibility and governance. This is an area that the inspection identified as a key issue for Somerset. So the Safeguarding Children's Partnership has been given responsibility for oversight of the action plan and making sure that the single agency actions are progressed and also that multi-agency actions actually do develop the system and keep children safe. And the Safeguarding Partnership will also track progress and quality assure the changes to make sure that children continue to be safeguarded. Currently, I am the chair of the Safeguarding Children Partnership Executive. I'm due to hand that over to Sheila Meldrum, who's the ICB, the children's lead and the chief nurse, in the next couple of months. So in terms of implementing the plan, there are aspects of this plan that are still in development, as you can see on this next slide. So the Safer Somerset Partnership, which Councillor Shearer actually chairs, and the Youth Justice Board have to also implement and oversee some aspects of the plan. And one of the issues that was raised in the inspection was that the Safer Somerset Partnership and the Safeguarding Children Partnership were not in sync, basically, that we were not addressing the right issues together, we were doing things in silos and not having the right impact in improving things for children. We've tried to resolve that over the last few months in terms of, you'll see in a minute, a slide that puts in a new diagram of responsibility and accountability. We are not getting to where we need to be by doing it in that manner. So we have now said we will have a workshop on the 30th of September with both those bodies to try and pull out in conversation how we're going to do this better and be assured that we have improved that for children. So that's an area of weakness that we haven't yet been able to clarify in terms of the plan, because there's still more work to do, and we recognise we now need to meet to do that. The second area is also about the police safeguarding practice, and this is another area where we have really struggled, because obviously Avon and Somerset Police are the police for Avon and Somerset Police area, not just Somerset, and their processes, their practice is the same across the Avon and Somerset area. So the deficits that have been identified in the joint inspection in Somerset are deficits that are also in other local authority areas, because the police practice in those areas is consistently poor across the whole of their footprint. We have agreed now with the police that they will meet with all the local authorities in the Avon and Somerset footprint area to have a conversation, which is likely to be a workshop in October, about what the police activity will look like and how all the local authorities in the area can be assured, including Somerset, that the police safeguarding practice and oversight will be effective and in a timely manner. That piece of work has been some time in development. I think the police have struggled to understand the need to do that piece of work across the force area rather than just in one local authority. But we are there now in terms of having that work done. So in terms of the key developments, so we have now got this pathway process, which is here in the diagram on the next slide, I think. So you might not believe this, but this is a very simplified version to what was available in terms of the inspection. So when we had the inspection, we presented them with our governance diagram, and they basically said it's completely unintelligible. I think we would agree that at that point it was incredibly difficult to understand, because it relates not just to what's happening in Somerset, but also to the Avon and Somerset force area, and also to the Police and Crime Commissioner, who also covers the Avon and Somerset force area. So there are loads of different strands coming off all these different organisations and their responsibilities. Some overlap, some are separate, there are gaps between them. So this diagram, believe it or not, is actually a simplified version. This is what the workshop on the 30th of September needs to discuss to make sure that it is a credible way forward and that it actually is intelligible and can do what we need it to do in terms of making sure that we understand serious youth violence in Somerset from the very earliest point, from the very earliest indicators, and that we are addressing it appropriately with the governance of both the Safer Somerset Partnership and the Safeguarding Children Partnership across the top of it. So in terms of the next area is around sharing information and intelligence. So the police, these elements here are the issues that have been put into the plan so far that still need further work. So sharing information and intelligence in relation to the police. So we talked before about the police having a robotics tool that harvests information about victims of crime, but not children who are perpetrators of crime. Obviously, as I've already discussed, children who are in county lines are also safeguarding risks as well as perpetrators, so should be in that harvested group, but aren't. So the police are saying that they're going to have a review to ensure that information is shared for all vulnerable children. Currently, we don't have a timescale for that, and clearly we need a very swift timescale in order to be able to make sure that those children are appropriately safeguarded. The police are also reviewing the risk assessment tool that they use to identify children who are at risk of serious youth violence to make sure that it's appropriate. They're saying they will do that by January 25. That does feel like an outside appropriate timescale. I would rather it was quicker, but they have got to train thousands of officers to use this risk assessment tool at the front line. So both developing it and training people is probably reasonable. The trust, in terms of the hospital trust, where there was the issue around emergency departments not identifying serious youth violence, are saying that they're going to develop a process to support the identification of vulnerability and to make appropriate referrals. Their current timeline is April 25. I think both Sarah and I are clear that that's not an appropriate timescale, and Sarah is working as the ICB who commissioned the hospital trusts to work with them to bring that forward to make sure that we have both an appropriate process but in a timely manner. There's also an issue in terms of recording. So at the moment in the hospitals, there are various recording systems, so alerts do not work in terms of alerting different bits of the system to each other. There's some work to do to align the alerts currently to make sure that people can identify them. But the trust are saying that what they need is a single system to make sure it is robust and they are assured that they have got all the right information for children. Their current timescale is 2027. Again, that does not feel to me or to Sarah, I think, to be an appropriate timeline, and Sarah is working with the trust to look at how that can be brought forward. So MAVE meetings are multi-agency vulnerable to exploitation meetings, are part of that simplified, complicated diagram previously. That's about making sure that we gather information from the front line and from communities about how at risk children are and what we do about that. We have said that comes under the Safer Somerset Partnership, and that is currently being implemented. The timescale for that is autumn, but we have said end of September. So we're expecting that to be ready for that workshop at the end of September. Sarah, I don't know if you want to comment at this point in relation to those NHS Foundation Trust issues.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Yeah, just to say that in terms of governance within health, because obviously we're dealing with multiple health system partners as well, the health element of the action plan is being overseen by the ICB, and I'm going to chair a regular meeting, or I've already chaired one, regular meetings of the progress of the action plan, and some of the dates the timings that Claire has just mentioned, we are going to challenge at the next meeting on the 7th of October. In regard to the digital work stream, I have to say that Somerset Foundation Trust, just to put this in context, have got 128 different clinical systems that need to be rationalised. So there is a lot of work to do there. They are also working on one electronic record system. However, that's now been pushed back to 2028, and I suspect, knowing the way health works, it will probably take longer than that to implement. So clearly, as Claire says, we need a more robust and a simpler solution for that in the short term. And my suggestion to the trust is that they nominate one of their clinical systems to be the main system for the sharing of safeguarding information, so that anybody using the other 127 systems will only have to access one other system to check out on any of the safeguarding information. But very happy to take any challenge on those deadlines, but I can assure the Scrutiny Committee that we are going to address those in the meeting on the 7th of October.
Thank you. Just Joe, there was an issue with the sound, but it's sorted now.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. Sorry, I had a real echo with it, and I can still hear it.
Okay, so the next section in relation to multi-agency training is a slightly more positive story, say. So there was an issue raised in the inspection about there being no consistency in relation to multi-agency training around serious youth violence. So the Safeguarding Partnership has taken that responsibility, and there is a multi-agency training packaging launching this month for the Safeguarding Partnership, which will be basic e-learning for all staff across the council, all other organisations where people are involved in working with children who might be at risk of serious youth violence. And there will be face-to-face training for people with specialist roles or identified roles with particular specialisms or expertise in that area by March 25. That feels like a positive start, but we do need to get the specialist training, the face-to-face specialist training in place, so that people who have that working with those most complex children have that specialist training in place. That will also include improving practitioner knowledge on trauma-informed work with families, which has been an ongoing piece of work for several years. There is some trauma-informed training that's available, but we're going to integrate that into this work so that actually people have that element of the work as training as part of their specialist training. And then we also have a child exploitation screening tool, which is held by the Safeguarding Children Partnership, and it's a tool that all organisations should be using when they have concerns a child might be involved in child exploitation. That's basically a checklist of factors, things that might concern you, that when you put them together might create a bigger picture of, yes, this child is probably involved in exploitation, or no, actually it's probably something else. So we're going to conduct a review of that to make sure it can be used at the earliest points in a professional being worried about a child. The inspection did identify that it was only children's social care that was using that tool consistently and early. So again, in the training, we need to make sure that both the police, health and other organisations understand the need to use that early. They are also part of developing, reviewing that screening tool to make sure there's nothing in it that's preventing them somehow accessing it or making them feel it isn't as useful as it could be. So the final point is around working with children in what's called risks outside the home meetings. We call them ROF meetings. So that's meetings that are held and led by Children's Social Care in relation to children and their families where there are risks outside the home, quite often county lines. We could hold those under child protection processes. We've decided not to do that for some children because actually their parents are not the risk, and their parents are working with us to try and reduce those risks to their children. And it does not seem reasonable to stigmatise and label a family with a child protection process when actually it is not their fault that their child is necessarily involved with county lines, and they are also working actively with us to try and reduce the risk of their child. What the inspection identified was that we don't always have the right people at those meetings. So sometimes the right people aren't invited, and sometimes when the right people are invited, they don't turn up. Social care do not do the right thing in terms of ensuring that they have the right information and escalating the issue in terms of people not attending. So that is currently in place. The work that was needed to do to make sure we had the right people attending and the escalation process being in place has now been resolved. So that one has actually been sorted out and is in place. So I think that's got to the end of the presentation. I'm sorry you don't have the overall plan, but I hope you can see why in terms of the work that still needs to be done.
Verbalise my frustration of obviously not having the report, not having the action plan. This is talking about, there's lots of issues there, and to me, some of the reason why I wanted to see the action plan, it's there are so many partners, so many different partners, so many different groups, so many different acronyms, so many different things, and we're talking about young people's lives being impacted now.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the committee wanted that to come. I've verbalised something you already know, but to me, I want to know how that we're doing something for these young people now, because what you've just explained, there are a number of things, and they're talking about 2025, 2026 for some of these things, and I don't think that doesn't feel right. So, my question is, so what can this committee do, or what can council do to change that? Because my concern is if this has been identified, when was the original report was somewhat 8-9 months ago.
It was, the inspection was May, the report was July, I think. So it's 3 months, which is too long.
Yeah, and we're still unsure on how things are, and I know when we work with partners, because my frustration, we're talking about the Somerset Safer Caring Partnership. That as councillors, I'm going in my head, I go, where are we on this? How do we know what the progress is being made, whether this is being taken seriously? No, I know it's being taken seriously, but it's how can we, as a, some of the reason why we want to, I think committee members want to know how this is moving forward in a timely basis, and things are happening. You see some of the bits there, and we get to it eventually, or at some point we'll look at it. And Heather, I'm waffling, and my frustration is I'm trying to pin down how I can verbalise my frustration without screaming.
I think there's been some screaming in rooms already, actually. So we share the pain. I just wanted to say this is only a tiny thing, but coincidentally, I'll have to scamper off from this meeting early. But I'm going to a meeting which is of the executive members from our council, and also the non-executive members from the ICB. And part of our desire over a period of time has been trying to improve our relationships so that we can actually make sure we're all doing the same thing in the same direction. It's a meeting without an agenda, so we share that. So this will be on the agenda from my point of view. So it's a small thing, but I think if we can all engage at the different levels, that will keep the pressure on. And Claire and the team know exactly. I can say the same for the Safer Somerset Partnership, because we feel the pain as well. We constantly work in that partnership space, and it is always a struggle. All the good stuff, the hard stuff is worth doing, but it's always a struggle. So I guess if something could come back from scrutiny to executive to be saying, these are some concerns we have around the partnership working. I'll be doing my lobbing things at the senior kind of executive types this afternoon and continually. And I'm sure Claire will be doing that with the officer, with officer contacts. I think all of the partnership component parts, everybody, all the people we deal with are always frustrated with each other. I think it's that making sure that the organisations behave to the same value set as some of the individuals, so we'll keep the pressure on.
There, I'll bring you in a second, but I acknowledge that it would have Somerset Council are taking things seriously. The NHS, they actually be taking things seriously. Who's holding the police to account?
Just pop straight back in again. I'm a woman of many hats. And the other thing I've took down here is I've already been in contact with the Police and Crime Commissioner. I chair the Police and Crime Panel, which holds the Police and Crime Commissioner to account. So I'll be raising that there again. We have meetings on the 24th and different times, and I've got a telephone number. We're overdue a conversation to make sure these things are happening. So it's a small thing again, but that would, in terms of holding to account, that's one methodology for holding them to account, and the rest would be through our normal partnership working.
So just for clarity, the Police and Crime Commissioner has overall responsibility. Is that?
The Police and Crime Commissioner has overall accountability for all of the policing functions in Avon and Somerset, and is also at the moment doing her new police and crime plan is out at consultation. There's a consultation on that as well, so we can always put stuff in there. But certainly one of the partnership working and preventative working is one of her 5 strands of what she wants her plan to be. So this should be right in her area.
take action, please, Fiona. Can you an actions that I, on behalf of the committee, write to the Police and Crime Commissioner to ask for her to feed in as to what and how she plans to make things improve the system.
Down here.
I'll get to that in a minute. Sorry, members, I apologize. I wanted to try and cover a couple of points while it was there. I've got a number of members have indicated. Oh, Sarah, I was going to bring you in. Did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. First of all, I can provide the committee with some assurance around the police aspects of this discussion. I'm actually at police headquarters now as part of the Violence Reduction Partnership Board, which is being chaired by the Police and Crime Commissioner. And rather frustratingly, I've just had to leave that meeting to come and talk to you just at the point where Lucy McCready from the Community Safety Partnership and I were about to present to that board on the JTI and the learning from the JTI. So I can assure the Scrutiny Committee that this is front and central of their consideration and is certainly high on the Police and Crime Commissioner's agenda. So that's the first thing. But the reason I had my hand up was just to talk about the urgency of completing the actions and the work that we know we have to do in the health service and across our multi-agency partnerships. So the process of the JTI includes regular feedback sessions at the end of every day of inspection, where key people in the partner organisations get together with the inspectors to hear the themes and the learning from the day. Even as early as that, we in health and our partners as well were taking away items for escalation and action immediately. So actually the learning and the actions began back in May when the inspection took place. Clearly Claire's presentation was a strategic presentation. Under those main action points, there has been an incredible amount of work already taking place operationally to address the issues and the themes coming out of that report. So, for example, the comment about our emergency departments, of course, we have staff who can identify risk and who are talking to their local authority and police counterparts on a daily basis about vulnerable people who are going through their emergency departments. That hasn't changed. Clearly, there are longer pieces of work to do in terms of skilling up those staff groups with the complexities of serious youth violence. And that's a longer term piece of work, particularly given the turnover of our staff groups as well, and the need to constantly update and train new members of staff. But I couldn't let that point go without being able to provide some assurance that it's not that we're waiting for any action plan to be ratified. The work started when even before the inspectors came to Somerset, because we identified through the preparation for the inspection items that needed to be addressed. So it is a huge piece of work. The action plan for our main foundation trust alone is currently, from an operational perspective, 22 pages long. So it is significant, and there are already a lot of green areas there around initial actions that have been taken to alleviate and mitigate the risk.
Guys, the room is on mute.
Sorry, John, I think the device seemed to mute itself. Can you hear now?
Yeah, I can, no problem at all.
There you go. Yeah, we're talking about talking about Avon and Somerset Constabulary covering a wide area, and we're talking about the individual counties within that area. Well, of course, you've got not only individual counties, but you've got individual areas and individual areas of those, and you could go down to former district council levels, even the old West Somerset. And in fact, I was in a meeting yesterday where people were talking about antisocial behaviour. And yes, where I live, there might be a little bit more antisocial behaviour. But let's be honest, it's not really the same level as there may be in other places, living in one of the second safest places in the country. So I wonder what we sort of want to achieve from them in that change of the processes where, you know, if it's actually the cutbacks where we no longer have inspectors or the amount of police in areas like we're in, say, Somerset West, how is that a national issue? And actually, when it comes to leading it back onto where we are with the health service and with the trust, is it national pressure they need? Because when I spoke about planning earlier, I sort of had a little dig at our planning department. We all, on a person, I think the planning system in the whole country is broken and it needs national intervention. And so, what point? I suppose my question is understanding how we hope in an area as diverse as Somerset, we hope that police can, and what we'd like out of them. I think that's my question.
So I suppose in response to that, what the inspection identified were some very specific issues in relation to the police, which do link to bigger issues locally and nationally in relation to sort of how the police function and the community. But the very specific issues were in relation to systems, largely in terms of how their systems work, and how those systems support and inform the protection of children. Those systems are not currently working well, and they need to resolve that in order to make sure that children are safe. So that the non-sharing of intelligence means that other people who are working with children don't know what the risks those children are facing are. That's critical, because actually what we're saying is children are potentially at risk because we don't know what's going on with those children in community when they might be at risk at the moment. So that's the critical issue for Avon and Somerset Police Force. Every police force area seems to have different intelligence sharing in different systems in order to pick up information, share it, etc. And because there is no consistency, just like there's no consistency of social care record systems across the country, everybody's doing things slightly differently. So the Avon and Somerset Police Force area it has been identified for them, this is not appropriate, and they've got to work very hard and very fast to try and put that right. And I think it's probably an issue that's like the police, like the health system, that a bigger piece of work needs to be done over several years. But what we need is the contingency in terms of what's going to happen now, immediately, to make sure that the information about children is shared very quickly with the right people. That also links into the other bit about making sure frontline officers are appropriately trained, so they understand what they're looking at when they go to houses or go to events, do incidents, and also making sure that frontline officers can refer it to the right place in terms of the form filling, the administration of their role, that they don't currently have a document that gives them the ability easily to record the issues around serious youth violence and present them in terms of a victim focus rather than a perpetrator focus. So that's the pieces of work that need to be done immediately in the force area, but there are wider issues like there are in health that need to be addressed both regionally and nationally.
And it'll be the recurring thing that's been happening with this committee and the council: data sharing. Everyone's data systems are different. Everyone's confidentiality levels are different. Members who've been here for a while will know it's something we go on and on and on about. We need to find a way to share data in a better way, so that the route to identify an issue is made shorter. Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. An age ago, I was a community safety portfolio for the county. I then went on to the police authority. We didn't have those problems in those days. When was our last inspection? Is the results from this inspection worse than the last inspection? How many, and it's not an answer you can do, but I'd like it in writing eventually, had the problem with the cutting of the police force, specifically with the Avon and Somerset, police force impacted on this work? And my final question is, how much is the knife problem in Bristol impacting on this work? Because they have an enormous amount of police officers trying to deal with the knife problem in the teenagers in Bristol, which is a specific problem they have. And the third question I have is that our friend Boris Johnson re-increased the police force and then stopped paying for it after 3 years. And my understanding is that all of the civilians who dealt with this particular subject are under threat of redundancy and are being replaced by newly trained police officers who have not got a clue apart from basic police training. Sorry to be so.
Henry, thank you. I'm just going to protect most of those questions can be answered by the people in this room because they're specific. So, go on.
I fully accept that. I would like a written answer later on in the day when we've liaised with the police and actually got the answers.
I mean, I'll make it a little bit easier than that. If you want to list your questions, right? Because I'm just conscious that our clerk isn't going to take the questions down to be going to the police. I'm happy to take those questions. So as chair, unless anyone tells me different, if you want to write those questions to me, I'll add to it, or even to the executive member here. She'll make sure that those points, but forgive me if I'm wrong, most of those questions are outside of our remit of responding. Claire, is that?
Yeah, most of those questions are related to the police, and I would not be able to answer those questions. But as Councillor Shearer is going to meet with the Police and Crime Commission, she should be able to have that conversation at least and get a level of response.
Can we have the answer to the question about the last inspection? What the difference between the last inspection and this inspection is, and how much it's deteriorated across the period? And I don't know when the last inspection was.
So it's a bit. So this inspection is an inspection across the system, basically. So this is not an inspection of the local authority on its own. So children's services are inspected by Ofsted. Our last inspection for children's services, children's social care, which is the element that's probably the most relevant here, was in 2022, and we were graded as good in all areas. This inspection was across all 4 different parts of the system. So racial youth justice, health, the local authority and the police. All those different inspectorates inspect individually as well, inspect organisations individually. So the police have been inspected on several occasions for the last 18 months. So in relation to children, there was a child protection inspection about 18 months ago, and earlier this year, there was a child custody inspection that looked at children in custody. And there are outcomes of those inspections. The outcomes of those inspections are fairly similar to the police actions that come out of this inspection. And that's one of the other issues that needs to be looked at in this workshop in October is let's look at all the outcomes for children from all the police inspections and link them all together to make sure we've got one cohesive plan that the police are going to move forward on, rather than lots of bitty bits from different inspections, to make sure that we get the right response for children.
When did you have your last inspection of this type?
So there's never been one of these before.
Okay.
So the reason for that is that they're called joint targeted area inspections, and the inspectorates, I think it's about 5-6 years ago, started a series of joint targeted inspections. And every year they inspect 6 local authorities on a particular theme. So this year's theme was serious youth violence. Other themes have been sexual abuse within the home, exploitation, all sorts of different themes. But it's a thematic inspection every year for 6 local authorities, and we just got chosen for this one.
Okay. Thank you for your question. Thank you for your response. Francis.
Yes. Microphone, yeah. Thank you. I read the JTI reports again yesterday to make sure that I saw and understood what we were talking about properly, and it doesn't make for good reading. I think I've got 2 questions. The first one is, I think from the report that it was clear that it's quite difficult for the police or their systems, don't know which, to see children who are perpetrators also as victims. And what we as a scrutiny group can contribute to that discussion and how that can be changed, because if it's a system thing, then the system is made by people and it's a hearts and minds question. That's one. The other one is, we know that children's vulnerability is of any kind makes them more vulnerable to violence. We know that exclusions are very high in Somerset. We know that some schools do amazingly good work, but how are schools going to be part, can be part, should be part of the action plan?
Okay, so in relation to the sort of child focused or child first approach, if you like, in the police, yes, that has been identified as an issue in terms of the non-safeguarding focus of children who are identified as perpetrators in Avon and Somerset force. But if you look at, which I have done, I've read all the other JTI reports across the country, so we were number 6 of 6. The other authorities that were inspected were more positive in terms of the outcomes for children in their authority area, but every single one talked about the police force needing to develop a child first focus. So that appears to be a national issue on the basis of that sample that needs to be dealt with by police college, presumably, in terms of trying to work with police forces to help them identify how to change the culture so that the culture around children is about being a child first, not and the safeguarding remit, rather than seeing children as perpetrators in their own right. Does that make sense?
So what can we do?
I think for this committee, you'd need to come to a view yourselves about what you'd want to do in relation to that. I think the conversation that Councillor Shearer is already having in relation to the Police and Crime Commissioner, that might be a sensible question for her to ask the Police and Crime Commissioner about how that could be supported in this fourth area.
Sarah, you got your hand up, is it for this point?
It was the previous point, Lee. It was just about the learning from the thematic reviews, bearing in mind that it's quite difficult to benchmark ourselves because, as Claire said, there's been so few inspections in the same theme. But interestingly, Devon local authority area a system has also been inspected for a JTI this year with a different subject. I was just looking back at my notes to try and find it. I think it was looking at their multi-agency response to early intervention in safeguarding. So quite a different focus to ours. But interestingly, the overarching themes were very, very similar about the police response, the health response and the local authorities response. So as Claire said, there was some very telling themes that just seem to keep popping out of multi-agency reviews regardless. For example, professional curiosity. It doesn't seem to matter which part of safeguarding you look at. There are concerns about how professionals are professionally curious and how professionals raise concerns and how they are they keep going and they escalate situations when they identify them. So it's just interesting that there are correlations even when the subject matter is different. That was only my point.
Okay, so
May I come back briefly on that? Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Claire mentioned the potential police college. If this is a national issue, is there a way of raising it nationally? That was just the thought on that.
I think that we've asked the executive member to make sure that point is included and covered as part of her conversation with the Police and Crime Commissioner. But what we can ask is for Heather to give us a response feedback from that meeting.
And possibly the LGA Children's Group and all those things as well.
Yes.
I'm more than happy to do that, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Schools, exclusions.
Sorry.
Yes. Can you just repeat that question for me?
How do the presentation we have hasn't really talked much about what work needs to happen or should happen or can be included in terms of schools exclusions, SEND and the extra vulnerabilities that all of those bring to children?
So the actions in relation to exclusions are wrapped up in the Education for Life strategy and the work under the SEND strategy, and linked to what we described earlier in terms of the funding streams. So we know that that schools are high excluding. When you talk to schools about why they exclude, some of that is because they don't feel they have the right resources or provision to be able to support children in mainstream schools, and therefore they're excluding. If we can get some of the funding issues resolved, then the indication is that the resolving some of those funding issues will support schools to have the right resources to keep children in school, which will reduce our exclusion rate. And that would reduce the number of children exposed to the risk of serious youth violence, because they'll be in school doing positive activity, not outside school where they're not necessarily very well overseen. Obviously, at the moment, we are working on that and developing that, and part of the consultation is part of that work to try and support schools to be able to be inclusive. It's not just about that work, there's lots of other work going on around that as well. That is included in the education element of the plan. I haven't included it in the presentation today because that feels as though that is in train. There is clear activity and clear progress in that, but it is in the plan that will go to Ofsted.
Okay, thank you. Ruth. Then I've got Joe online, and then we'll look to wrap around this one up because, oh, sorry. We have some more. Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. It's good, everyone's really interesting. So my first question is, you talked about in the slides around the e-learning which launched this month. This is sort of a practical question. Is that going to be rolled out to the voluntary and community sector as well? You talked about council staff, because I'm conscious that a lot of these are going to be picked up early in youth clubs and people that are working directly with young people. So is that going to be available for them? That's my first question.
Yes, so it's delivered by the Safeguarding for Children Partnership, which is a public website and is open to everybody. I'm sure there will be extensive comms to make sure that the voluntary sector, as well as everybody else, is aware of that training, is able to access it.
And then the second one's really picking up on what Francis said. So like Francis, I sat and read the report, which is rather depressing. And my concerns was, I don't see anything in the presentation today that links really strongly with what they were concerned around about early identification of SEND and how that increased vulnerabilities. Is it just that we haven't got that level of detail in this? I know we've talked about exclusions, but actually that early identification work.
Yes, so that is in the plan, but it relates to the Education for Life strategy and the SEND strategy. So because I'm reasonably confident that there is work ongoing around trying to identify SEND issues earlier in the system and earlier in life, I haven't put it in this presentation today, but it will be in the overarching plan.
Thank you. And the Chair, I have one for you, I'm afraid. Sorry. You have said about the committee writing to the police. Would it be equally possible for the committee to write to the Subset Foundation Trust around our concerns about some of the deadlines and the extension again? 2028 feels very long in the future.
Yes, we'll make it. Yes, it's yes. We'll have a look at what to write. What I'll probably do is share with the committee the points that we're going to make first to make sure that we cover them all, because and it's also we have a conversation. Yes. With Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a question as such. I just wanted to make a couple of points, which are probably obvious. But in the slides, we're looking at new systems, perhaps not coming in place until 2027 or 2028. And the concern is that by the time they're implemented, they're already out of date. They're developed in isolation, only suitable for one organisation. And also the organisations might wait for the systems to be in place before they say they can do anything. I do worry that to an extent, the different organisations, which include ourselves, shift blame between each other, whether that be the police, the NHS or ourselves. And there is still an issue, I think, with sharing data between organisations, but also within organisations as well. Thank you.
There, your hands up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify the system issue. The Foundation Trust has 120 something clinical record systems already. This is not to fill a gap where nothing exists at the moment. There are 120 something systems in place that are working very well. But if you are a radiographer, you will be using a different clinical record system to if you are a mental health nurse on a acute mental health ward, for example. The idea of one electronic clinical record, which by the way is also going to be shared with our health partners in Dorset, so this is a joint Somerset Dorset endeavour, is to ensure that every single clinician in the Foundation Trust is recording on the same clinical record as opposed to a number of records. So I just want to assure members that there is not a gap at the moment for clinical record recording. They are in place already. And the reason there is such a long lead time is to ensure the system is as future-proofed as possible. And unfortunately, it's a massive piece of work, 4,500 staff in Somerset Foundation Trust, plus everybody in Dorset as well to be taken into account. So that was my point. Thank you.
Just coming back on that, it's great that we're working with Dorset on that. The NHS is working with Dorset, but you would hope there'd be a nationwide system, especially things like county lines across different NHS trusts. Thank you.
Okay, do you want to make it?
I just wanted to make a point, if I could just address Sarah. Sarah, in terms of a letter expressing the committee's concern, as the ICB is the commissioner of the trust and is therefore responsible for the quality and the services delivered in the trust, would it be more helpful for any letter for the committee to come to you or to Sheila in the ICB as effectively the commissioner of the services and therefore the accountability sits with the ICB?
Yeah, that would be very helpful, Claire. And in fact, this the JTI report and action plan have already been through the ICB's quality committee, where our non-executive directors also sit, and has been signed off by them. So we would take that letter and any response to that letter to that committee, which has delegated responsibility for safeguarding from our ICB board. So yeah, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Just a point in relation to the data and to information sharing. I acknowledge what you were saying, Sarah, in the same way we have different departments and teams, but the point about this is how we can quickly identify an issue and how people can signpost. And sometimes it's multiple things happening that, if you add them all together, raises the worry flag. And that's the previously, one of the examples that were given to me were the availability. I'm using this as an example, but the availability of the morning after pill. Different pharmacies and different doctors. There are different places for a pill to be provided, to be prescribed. But there wasn't necessarily a tag where if a young person was going to place A, a pharmacy, then place B, a few days later, then place C, there was no tag. That was in my head, the data sharing, the identifying that young person may be at risk because of that. I think that makes sense. There are issues there. It's how we can quickly flag things within different data systems.
Yeah, sorry, Claire.
Go on, Sarah.
I was going to say that's a different issue. So pharmacies are not part of Somerset NHS Foundation Trust. They are all independent businesses commissioned by the ICB as are GPs. In those situations where staff don't have huge amounts of risk information from other independent providers, this is very much about their identification of risk from the presenting information they have, as opposed to also understanding potentially a child's presentation elsewhere. However, one pivotal point of information is general practice, because the vast majority of health information is shared with general practice. So they are a central depository for all information about an individual. Now, emergency contraception is a difficult one. With children, absolutely, there is a requirement to consider the risk there and share. But for an adult seeking emergency contraception, there is a choice for them to have their GP notified or not. So that's a little bit different, but I don't want to get into the detail of it because that's obviously not why we're all here this morning.
I withdraw that. Claire, did you want to come in there?
I was just going to say that there is a big issue nationally, and there always has been, as we're all aware, in terms of data sharing. We do have a system in Somerset called Transform, which is has been developed internally, that is used now by quite a lot of different partners, which pulls in information sources from lots of different organisations. I think it's got over 1,000 different sources now of information, so that people who are in the front line in terms of practicing in social care in schools, I think starting to be in health, and see what that information at a reasonably high level is in relation to individual children. If the committee would like to see a sort of test of that, so you can see how that's developing and the work we're doing on that, which is seen as nationally leading, the Department of Education are very supportive of it and want us to develop it, then I'm sure that the people who are involved with that will be happy to present it so that you can understand it, or we could do a separate session that members could attend if that would help.
What's it called again? Sorry.
Transform.
Okay, Francis wanted to come back. Just
A very quick question. Bearing in mind the 128 systems, one of the things that Sarah said to us was that the interim solution is to make sure that safeguarding information is recorded on one system. Is that now in place? If not, when will it be in place?
That is why we're having a meeting on the 7th of October, Francis, to get that assurance from the Trust.
okay, thank you. Andy.
Chair. Thankfully, all my medical records were sent direct to my GP as soon as I left hospital. So all my medical history was there, which was brilliant. Some of my concerns have been allayed by comments from Sarah and Heather, but one of my chief concerns was that it's taken 3 months to convince the police that this is an institutional problem that they've got, and not just a local area problem they've got, and that they don't need just to put a sticky plaster fix on Somerset in order to get through an inspection. I would like assurances now from the police that they are taking this extremely seriously, and it is going to be from the whole of, the whole of the area, the four service areas, rather than just them looking at Somerset. Well, we've had an inspection, therefore we need to fix what's happening down there.
So obviously there's no police representative here, and I just to sort of talk it through. I would say that the police have recognised and did recognise before this inspection that their line management systems do not really support safeguarding in children, as they have a district and a specialist line management system where safeguarding sort of falls down the middle. Before this inspection happened, they had already agreed to appoint a safeguarding, I think she's a superintendent, to work with the safeguarding partnerships across the Avon and Somerset area to make sure that safeguarding children was actually integral in all the different aspects of the police that needed to be, so that these systems could be developed and the working relationships could be developed to make that happen. So they had identified it as an issue. The person who I've been working with on this workshop across the 5 areas is the person who's the superintendent of safeguarding. So they are taking this seriously as an organisation. They recognise that their governance structure and their staffing does not work well in terms of focusing on safeguarding children as a priority across the whole workforce. I brought this person in to try and help resolve that. It is going to be a long road to get that sorted, but I wouldn't want you to think they weren't taking it seriously. I think you are right in that they thought they could start in Somerset because we just had the inspection, and it has taken a little while to filter through that actually we need to do it for the whole force area because the issues will be the same, because the systems and the processes and the staffing are the same across the whole force area. But we are there now, which is step forward.
Thank you. Okay, online, Joe, sorry you had to wait so long. Thank you for putting your hand up. If you hopefully you're still with us. Councillor Randall Green. No, you aren't.
No, I hadn't put my hand up. Thank you. So I've very quickly say, really interesting discussion and lots of points we can take forward. And it's now getting really echoey, so I'll shut up.
Thank you. That's one of the problems with the online, the loop online. I'm just trying to say, so there are no further questions, and thank you for the do. So what next is what I'm just thinking in my head. We've agreed that the committee would write, or I would write on behalf of the committee to the Police and Crime Commissioner specifically, and potentially the ICB, and it's just to highlight our concerns with the timescale with implementation of this. Once the final action plan is generated, it is public knowledge. You say the safeguarding board will be the ones responsible for monitoring. Is that?
Yeah, so Ofsted and the other inspectorates have written to the Safeguarding Partnership Executive to say you are responsible for the effective implementation of this very wide-ranging cross-agency action plan. So it's therefore the responsibility of the Safeguarding Partnership to implement the plan and to report back if Ofsted or any other inspectorate require us to do so in terms of the progress on that plan.
As to what next is members, do we want to have, when would be a reasonable timescale to have some feedback with what's going on, Claire?
We're on the basis thinking off the top of my head, we have to submit by the 25th of October. I hope to be able to submit before then. I'd expect there to be a degree of progress that we should be able to report on. And if we can't report on it, you should know in terms of the concerns at that point by January, so 3 months. So it'll be October, November, December, January.
We've got a meeting in February, so February's meeting me. Can I go on?
Probably 2028, Mr. Chairman.
And so what I will say, but in closing, what I'll say is, members, the letters I'll make sure that we put those together and move them. We'll bring this back for an update in the February meeting. But what I will ask, both of Heather and of the Director of Children's Services, is if things change or if there are any concerns in the meantime, could you please bring it back to me, and then with a view to the committee, because obviously the executive members meeting with the Police and Crime Commissioner and other bodies, there are things happening, and I would be comfortable. I think the committee would be keen if there is any movement or updates, if you were able to share those with us, so that we can share those even if it's electronically through the meeting. Thank you, members. Thank you very much for where we've got. So I've got a comfort break programme now, which I will take. We are slightly behind, but let's hope we can play catch up with some of the items, because it should in theory be short items. So we'll take a 10-minute break, back and restart at 12:10, please. Okay, thank you. So our next item on our agenda, trying to find it, item agenda number 8 is that the members will recall that we've been having conversations about the children looked after numbers being higher than we previously had. It's been usually around the 550 plus or 500-ish. We've identified that number's increased, and we asked for some feedback and about whether this was being looked at by the service. The service responded to say that the Transformation Board were looking at it, and consequently, Jane is going to give us an update on the position and feedback from them. So thank you, Jane.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. For those of you following this on the agenda pack, it starts at page 39, and Fiona's agreed to share the slides for me, as my IT is very unhappy. Okay, so the purpose of the presentation, which has been shared with you prior to the meeting, is to give you a commentary on the rise in numbers of children looked after in Somerset. I'm going to do this by comparing the numbers of the children becoming looked after versus those that are ceasing to be looked after, because that's an ongoing in and out kind of process. Exploring some of the reasons for this and taking you through some of the deep dive work we have been doing to try and understand what some of the issues are facing our children and families and how we respond as a service, and then taking direction from this committee if there's further work you would like us to do. So if you'd like to go forward 2 slides for me, Fiona, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so what this first graph shows you is that whilst our CLA numbers have been increasing, this is against the backdrop of rising demand for a service from children's social care in general. So you'll see there are 3 lines on there. The top line refers to children in need numbers within children's services, and you can see that that started at 900 and in August 24 was up at 1,106. The middle line refers to children looked after, which we're going to go into in some more detail. And the bottom line is with regards to our child protection plan. So you can see that increase in children looked after is 7.3%, children in need 22.9%, and child protections increased by 54.4%. So I just think that shows the level of demand in Somerset in the system. What we do know about Somerset, and I know Councillor Nicholson asked this earlier, is we still remain low. We have one of the lowest rates of children looked after in the southwest region. That is still the same as it always has been. We are still low compared to our statistical neighbours, other good authorities, and we are still low compared to the national children looked after rate. So that doesn't mean to say we're not concerned at the rising numbers, but to put it in that context is important. So if we move on to the next slide then, which looks at the children that have been, so what we did is we looked at an 18-month period, because that was easier to compare those coming into care versus those leaving our care. So you can see from January 23 to June 24, the number of children that have come into our care and the age ranges that shows. You can see that by far the largest percentage is the 0 to 4 and the 11 to 15. And for the purpose of this presentation and the recent deep dives, they are the 2 age groups that we did some auditing work and looked into in more detail. The next slide refers to children that have left our care and does a comparison of the 6 months Jan to June in 2023 versus January to June in 2024. And what you can see is we've had a decrease in the number of children that have left our care. So we've had more coming in than we've had left our care, and we've seen a decrease in that in 2024. In particular, you can see we have seen a decrease in the 6 to 10 age children, aged 6 to 10 that have left our care, as we've seen an increase in percentage change in the 16 and 17-year-olds. So we will come back to the age range of 6 to 10 later on. Okay, so what we know about children leaving our care, moving on to the next slide, is there are some children come into our care for a very short period of time whilst we are in legal proceedings, and we are looking to work with that family to try and ensure that child can remain in their family network. For children that leave our care, as you can see, again, the comparison between 2023 and 2024, we have similar numbers returning to family or connected carers within that family network. We have a similar number that go to special guardianship. Again, that's a family member who's going to take on looking after that child long term. So they're no longer part of the care system, and children that are adopted. The 2 points to note that are important here is our number of children coming into our care who are unaccompanied asylum-seeking children has remained consistent since 2021-22. We mainly receive 16 and 17-year-olds because we recognise that we have a shortage of foster carers to actually look to take younger children. Those children, because they're 16 or 17, turn 18 much quicker. So it does cause some pressure on our leaving care service because they still receive a service from them. But in respect to the CLA numbers, children looked after numbers, it remains quite consistent. The other important point to note for this comparison of dates as well is that when children turn 18, they leave our care. And we had a bigger than average cohort in August 2024. We had 13 of our children in care turn 18, where usually it's 5 to 8. And we've got another larger cohort in January 2025. So where you see dips, if you ever look at our data month on month and see a dip for children leaving care, it could well be that we have a cohort leaving care at that time. Also, for our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, some of those that don't arrive here with a date of birth or get given the 1st of January. So again, that will cause a dip in numbers. So it's just a couple of points to note on that around it. So In the same period last year, 104 children became 18, was this year it's going to be 125. So we'll see a change there. So if we move on then 2 slides, the areas being explored. So we wanted to look at some of the reasons behind what might be preventing more children leaving our care. So I think the first one, I'll go through, sorry, I'll mention all 4, then go through each of them in a little bit more detail. So one of them is around the length of the care proceedings, so the work we do in the courts. Second, education. Thirdly, reintegration and the barriers of getting children back home in a sustainable way. And then areas of growth coming in. So turning first then to the length of care proceedings, and there is an acronym on this slide that I will explain. What we know is nationally proceedings should be completed within 26 weeks. Nationally, the average is 37, in the Southwest region 35 weeks. Taunton is an outlier on that, which is all our courts. It's called Taunton Court, but our courts in Yeovil, anything involving our Somerset children that comes under, is around 47 weeks, and on average goes between 45 and 47. So straight away, we can see that will impact on children's outcomes, and impact on the time they may spend in our care. We all know that 26 weeks is half a year. That was already quite a considerable period of time in a child's life to determine what that permanent arrangement will be for them and where they're going to live and who's going to care for them. When it goes to 47 weeks, we're almost at a year. So that's something that we are concerned about. We have had in-depth discussions and have ongoing discussions with our legal department. We have not highlighted any significant practice concerns leading to those delays, but what we do know is if there are significant delays in our courts, we get delays in hearings, we get an excessive number of hearings where they're wanting to understand our care plan more that we do challenge. Our court often will order more assessments from other expert witnesses outside of our social workers who we consider are an expert and do provide assessments and statements, and judgments not being given in a timely way. So, but we are confident in our practice and our ongoing assessment of our practice that we are dealing with any concerns and trying to avoid any delays on our part. So CAFCAS is the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service. So every child that is going through any sort of public law care proceedings will have a court guardian who is there to ensure that their wishes and their welfare is kept at the centre of those proceedings. We work really closely with CAFCAS, and those relationships have improved over the last few months. We do joint auditing work, so we've looked at children's files around what we do, what they do, to make sure we've got that shared understanding for our children to get it right for them. So we're quite confident in that, and we will continue to do that. So that's dealing with the length of care proceedings. Moving on then to education, and we've talked about education before, and we do know that education in respect of children being in school, attending school and not being excluded impacts on the family and communities. Families who may already be under pressure and struggling in whatever way that might be, may be open to us, working with us. Children being out of school and at home with them all the time puts extra pressure on some of those relationships and on some of those factors, which then can result in them either coming into our care or needing a more intensive service from us. What we also know, though, is the recent exclusion project identified that 80% of the cohort of children that schools had identified as being the most at risk of permanent exclusion were not open to us at all. So we know education plays a key factor in supporting children to remain in their families and in their communities and access all the services we would want them to do. Moving on to reintegration, we have questioned, because of the rise in demand, as some of the reasons why children aren't leaving our care and returning to families, is that because we've lost some of that focus on it because of the amount of work coming into the system. What we know is we work really hard wherever possible to return children to their families, whether that's within 6 months, whether it's within 2 years, or whether we're looking at it throughout their childhood, coming up to 16. We know very well that a lot of children vote with their feet on turning 16 or 17 and go home. What are we doing before then to look at those relationships and how we might be able to support some family time there to enable that to be sustainable when they do. What we know is there's a lot of work that needs to go in leading up to it, during it and after. So we are reviewing our offer to children and families in our various bits of our service to ensure that we have got that right, including the role. We've got the emotional health and wellbeing team that do a lot of support to foster carers currently. What can we learn from that about what we need to put into families to support those parents and that child when it first goes wobbly for that first time after they've gone home, to make sure it doesn't break down. We've got a really strong family group conference model in Somerset that's been held up nationally and continues to be seen as really positive. How are we using that family group conference model to say, what's your plan around this child and children when they come home to ensure they stay in the system? And we are we're currently going to pilot a family safeguarding model in the family intervention service at that prevention level. How could we use it as well around reintegration? But what we do know is we don't have any more money, so any change in our service provision, we've got to be able to adapt that and work with that within the resource. Okay, so moving into areas of growth then. So what we did then, we did audits of looking at the growth of sort of the younger children under 5 coming in to care, and then also the older ones. So approximately 38% of those becoming looked after are aged between 0 to 5. What we know is that we do very well achieving permanence for children under 5. A higher percentage go to become adopted, which is a really good permanence option for them. We know that we, in Somerset, we are able to put children into what we would call early permanence placements. We do really well with that, both regionally and nationally. We're the top in the southwest. What that means is a child can go into a foster placement, and those foster carers have indicated they would like to go on to adopt them. So they want to be adopters, they become temporary foster carers, which means if that is the outcome of that, those children don't have to move again. So they may go from hospital into that foster placement. That then becomes their adoptive home, which we see as a real success for our children and not having a number of changes. For those cases that we reviewed in some detail, and we've done that work both with CAFCAS and we've discussed it with some of our other partners as well. All cases reviewed, it was appropriate for us to be in that legal framework. We had appropriately responded to need. It was proportionate, and we had put in that graduated response that we look at. We know that last year and the year before, we had a higher number of what we would call non-accidental injuries. So these weren't children known to us at all, but an accident happened, and as a result of that, we became involved. We respond appropriately in those non-accidental injury situations or trigger incidents. We are able, if we need to issue straight away, whether that means going into the courts for an emergency protection order to ensure that child is safeguarded, or working with the family in that more graduated response way. Of the cases we looked at, only a third were completed in the 26 weeks. So, and again, that goes back to that issue of delay for our children, preventing them from actually leaving our care when they can go to do that. And one actually took 9 months for a hearing to be scheduled, and we still don't have a date for a final hearing for that child, which again, we're concerned about, because that's about that child knowing what their permanent option is going to be. So other cases we looked at, 64% had a final care plan of adoption, and a further 18% placed with families. That's quite a high percentage were going to achieve permanence within that kind of family environment. Okay, so turning then to the 11 to 15-year-olds. So what we know for these children coming into our care, they often have much more complex needs. And certainly when we look, thinking of the conversation we were having earlier about residential placements, we struggle a lot more to find foster carers that want to care for 11 to 15-year-olds, particularly those with more complex needs. So we did a deep dive of 8 of the children, which was 10% of those that had come looked after in the last 18 months. One of these children was an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child. So there was no previous involvement. They'd arrived and we'd taken them into our care. The other 7 children, though, all had a previous involvement with us when they were younger, and 5 of them had a significant history with multiple referrals over time, child protection plans or previous proceedings. So what we want to do with that is to do some further work to really understand if there's any learning for us about what we did earlier. Did we ensure that every time they came to our attention, were we doing something different, and how were we responding in that graduated way, just to see if there's any learning there. And for those that did have a significant history, we saw identifiable behaviours linked with trauma and or abuse, which I'm certainly not surprised that I'm saying. And so we know for those children with a more complex history coming in, there often has been that previous involvement with us. So the question, I guess, for me and certainly colleagues that were looking at that is, are we doing the right thing when they're younger? Is there anything we should have done sooner? Are their needs more complex because we've been trying to keep them in the family? Should we have done something differently? So there's some further work to do around that to help us with that. So further areas to explore, what does the learning tell us from what we know from looking at that work? And I've commented on some of the actions we want to do there. We are changing our supervision practice, that's in train now to do, to reflect on those previous interventions, to ensure we don't keep repeating. That's really important for staff, that they feel that we are enabling them to think differently and think, what could we do that may change that trajectory for that child. What about the 5 to 10 age group? Is our intervention right? So currently we know that, they're not a high number of children coming into our care, but actually, what is it we're doing with that group? Is there any learning there? We have seen a slight increase in that age group coming very recently. What we don't want is for that age group to go up. Again, it's about, did we know them before? Maybe they were under 5, where we know we have much more success in working with children and achieving permanence for them. And I guess the question we're always asking is, can we change the trajectory for those children, particularly those teenagers, 11 to 15, so we don't end up coming into high-cost residential placement or spending a period of time in unregistered because we can't actually find something to meet their needs. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of the presentation, Chair.
Thank you. I've got a couple of people asked questions already. So Marcus, Councillor Kravis, please. Maybe if you didn't hear, you wanted to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you. Excellent explanation of the presentation I had read earlier, and it's excellent presentation of it. But unfortunately, I found myself slowly as you were going through, getting angrier and angrier and angry about what you said earlier on. In the first one about the Taunton course being 47 weeks. We talk about the planning system nationally being broken. Who'd want to be a planner? No wonder there any. Who'd want to be a judge? I'm just gobsmacked that, we have children in care because we got a call system, and for any of those that have been through it or in it, we've all seen it, it's antiquated. And you got the call in Taunton sending out, this is a story I heard, they sent out, someone got ruled against because Taunton Court sent it out in the post during the postal strike. So it took 3 weeks to get there, and the hearing was in 2 weeks. And at some point, somebody needs to deal with a system that is probably obviously antiquated and doesn't move quick enough. And, again, it boils down to, they'll say, oh, we haven't got the resource and we haven't got the money. Well, no one's got the money because you're taking so long. We're paying for someone to be in care for 6 months longer than we should be, which could be a thing solved. And I don't know how we deal with it. And I know, should we invite someone from, is there a call system, call service? I don't know. You probably have to write to them anyway, because they probably don't do email. Do we invite someone to come scrutiny, explain why you've got nationally, was it 26 weeks? I've lost it. 26 weeks, which I'd argue is probably a bit too long, but I understand there's work that's got to be done in between time. And yet in Taunton, we're at 47 weeks. I know it's Somerset, but dear me, do me a favour.
We speak so slowly.
Well, I'm that gobsmacked by it. I had other questions that I've been, talking about exclusions. I probably think Francis will probably pick some of those up. It gets back to, I think, and I've asked it before, is that specific schools are the problems and what we're doing to dealing with specific schools are some worse than the others. I did have, my common question to 15-year-olds going back to school for their last year GCSE just last week is, any teachers the same then? And that shouldn't be a question that someone should ask in jest, but it was more of a question of looking for information. And actually, one of them said yes. Actually, I've still got the same English teacher. So how do we deal with situations like that? And what power do we have to deal with situations like that? But I'm sorry, I'm in danger of turning into one of my outbursts, I'm afraid, but I'm still a bit gobsmacked about 47 weeks. We've all been there, and what can we do? Can we invite someone to come and explain to this scrutiny committee why they're so slow being polite?
Okay, so the judicial system, in for children, is led by somebody called, Sir Andrew McFarlane, who is the, president of the family division. So he's the senior judge nationally for, the courts in relation to children. So, we have been trying to work with the local court around those timescales of the issues that James says. He will be aware that there are judicial areas, including Taunton, that are out of kilter. And as this out of kilter status for this area is continuing, I will contact him, write to him formally, and ask for support in trying to reduce the length of time that these proceedings are taking.
Can I come back there? The problem we got there is by the time we do, it could get better before you do that, but we could end up with worse. But the longer, by the time all that happens, at some point, someone has to, and I'm not saying it says, because obviously that at some point we need to put pressure on them to actually deal with the issue that is affecting people's lives. Let alone forget the money side of it, but that's just. And I'm just shocked.
Fortunately, I have no control.
Yeah, no, I know.
I'm
MPs for, I suppose.
One of the outcomes for today is that the committee would like it recorded that its frustration with the time that courts, the children's cases are taken to go through, young people's cases are taken to go through the court system, and would like to try to understand some of the reasons behind that.
Yeah, I think that would be very useful, because I'd say if I did what I want to do, which is on my campaign to get better buses from West Somerset and bus to Bridgewater, block the roads one morning at rush hour, I'd probably be in the courts in 2 days and probably in jail.
Alistair.
I'm on, sorry.
Alistair.
Just going to rub my Nicolette patch.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if the question is really for Claire or Jane, I'm not quite sure. However, safety, health and welfare is the most important thing for actual small children over and above anything else in any agenda. Looking at the figures, what you had up there is 0 to 4 years of age is very, very young infants, very young, who has to be looked after at all costs. If one is taken away from a family, just let's say 6 months, 9 months old, the problems, as we can all imagine, have to be either alcohol, perhaps drugs, perhaps violence, or anything else. I don't really know, but that's the way I look at it. So what happens then when the child is taken away, looked after, just let's say fostered because they're 6 months old? At what point does a care worker deem it okay for this child to be handed back? Do they go to the family home, talk to either parent or parents, whatever, whoever's there, and then say, yeah, everything's fine, they can return this child back? Or is it a much more rigorous process to do that?
Members, can I just, before, I welcome the interest, we're looking at CLA numbers in this particular instance, rather than delving down into some of the rationales behind it. I won't stop the response, but it's just, let's remember that this is, the reason this is coming to us is because the number of children looked after has increased, and we should be asking why, rather than,
Just as I'm happy to meet with you though, outside of the meeting, the decision for a child to return home is with the court, not with us. So we will provide the assessments and all the work, but the decision is with the court, not with us.
Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Part shape, Marcus, it's the same subject that I'm on, but the exclusions and send and care and so on and so forth are all part of. We've already touched on that earlier this time. But back on the courts, it's unconscionable. I've in a different role sat in meetings with judiciary and social workers. The behaviour of certain of members of the judiciary here was dreadful. But that's another matter. My worry is that we believe that we are providing the right evidence, we are doing the right things, we are presenting the court with, and that quite apart from the delays of actually not having hearings, that the response of the judiciary isn't always appropriate, in that they're asking for things that we think we've already provided and so on. Is there a forum in which we can examine with them why they think that, why they think that we aren't providing the information that satisfies them? Or is there a way of exploring this? Or is this something which just can't be explored?
So there is a local family justice board that I sit on along with our legal and the courts and CAPCAS. There are subgroups of that to explore, and they have action plans on some of the issues. And Judge Skellorn has invited our legal rep to meet with them at any time to discuss any thematic issues. So we are able to escalate, not individual children. If there are themes coming through around whether that's to do with behaviour or certain delays, we have the opportunity to escalate it through our legal department with the judge.
May I just briefly, is it giving us any understanding that we might, of anything that we might need to change, or is it having any effect at the other end either?
So we have certainly changed some of the ways in which we practice as a result of those conversations. So we now tend to front load, or what we call it, all our proceedings. So make sure prior to going into the court, we have absolutely everything, so that we can't say, go back and get this. We have been successful with some of the conversations where I've been asked to write statements on particular themes and issues, and that has been received from the court and understood. I think it takes time, and it will take more time.
Thank you. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the 11 to 15s figures. It looks like of the 10% cohort, of the 10% sample you took out of the 80, well over 70% of them have had significant issues with the council, multiple issues with the council through their life. Is that typical of the other 70 on the books, or is that sample special? And if it is, then we've got an awful lot of children that have got multiple issues, and is there anything that we're learning from that in order to reduce that number?
Thank you, and I think that's one of the outcomes of that piece of work, is we want to look at the rest to understand, because it was a random sample. So either did we pick the 10%? What we know is a high percentage of them will be known to us in some way, but not all. So we also know for that cohort, Claire mentioned earlier around some of the county lines issue where we didn't know some of those young people before. We have last year certainly had another cohort of girls that came in, or it might have been 2 years ago, where self-harm was a particular feature. Some of those we had never been involved with before, so it isn't always the case, but we do know there's quite a high percentage that have had some involvement with us over the years.
Thank you. Bruce.
So mine is connected to the reasons for people ceasing to be looked after. So you've obviously highlighted around going back to family or special guardianships. How many of those then come back in, if that makes sense? Because we haven't got any data on that. And I just want to see that we're robust in our support for those families to stop that happening again.
Yeah, and I'm happy to provide some further information if people would like that around that. We do see some special guardianships arrangements break down. The same with adoptions. It's often in the teenage years. And we see it with long-term foster arrangements as well, where they may have been there 8, 10, 12 years, which has led us to look at our support in all those areas, what's on offer. Adoption isn't provided by us, it's provided by Adopt Southwest, but certainly we reviewed our support offer to special guardians and what we can provide. And what we are aiming to do is try and offer something around that sort of puberty teenage bit, but we can't force that on people because they have no involvement with us. So it's about making sure they're aware of that offer and that recognition that that child is becoming a teenager and everything that comes with that. And this is what we can offer you. This is what is available, in the hope that they will take that up. But we have, for every special guardianship arrangement, we have a support plan that we agree at the time, which does include a financial package if that is appropriate. And that's means tested and reviewed on an annual basis. So it's about trying to map what is working and are there gaps in that.
Thank you. Marcus, if you could.
Yeah, it was, well, it's actually getting on the unaccompanied asylum seekers, because obviously when someone's in care, they get to 18 and you've got a young person support to 25, haven't you? But if they get to 18 and they're an unaccompanied asylum seeker not being granted asylum, do they then just end up getting chucked in a hotel by the government until they're old enough to, whether being assessed, then do they just get kicked out on the streets or get into that system, or what happens there?
So because they've been looked after in our care, they are still care leavers. We have a very small proportion that aren't granted leave to remain. I think we've had 2 or 3. No, I think they have all chosen to leave and not tell us where they have gone, prior to them maybe being responded to by the authorities. But the majority stay in touch with us and take up our leaving care offer.
Thank you. Okay, just a couple of points for me. So just bring us back to, so the question is, in my head, the increase has been longer than than a glitch. Are you comfortable, is the service comfortable, the transformation board comfortable that it is, there's no apparent reason, or we're aware of the reasons that we're trying to deal with them, and that it's a natural increase rather than a surprise?
Yes, if we map it against the other demands on the service, like children in need and child protection, our rise is proportionate to that. Yeah. And
we're still within national limits.
Yeah, we are still lower than
statistical names, etc.
Yeah, as we have been.
So the committee, we've identified a potential issue. We've asked the question and we've been responded to. So just the final one, Jim. What next?
So as I've indicated, we plan to continue to look at these age ranges and try and get learning and how we might need to change our services, look at working with some of our other agencies, whether that's, housing, other departments we know impacts on families. And yeah, so we've got some actions in there around learning and development, but if there's anything else the committee would like further reporting on or areas to consider, happy to take those.
I think the point that in our notes from this meeting and for the minutes, it will be we note the fact with the frustration of the court process and the time that it takes from there, etc. And you're looking into that. Should you find something that you think is relevant, if you could report that back to us, we can include that with the court process. But otherwise, members are happy to draw a line under this one. Oh, sorry, John Hunt. I didn't mean that, Sam. I didn't see your hand, John. I apologise. John?
Not a problem at all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, most of what I wanted to ask has already been commented upon. So I'll just ask 2 very brief questions. Going back to family members receiving some of our children when they go through the system for the special guardianship. Do they receive, do those family members automatically, or do they receive some sort of financial assistance from the council, or is it a case of they have to claim from the government? And I'll just give you my second one briefly. We talked about children leaving and the numbers coming down, leaving our care. Now, obviously, they're leaving it sort of 17, many of those. But it kind of almost feels like well, that's okay. We can forget that. I appreciate we don't, and it goes on to our adults team. But presumably there is a seamless transfer there. It isn't a sort of cut off, and they have to sort of retake them on again. Thank you.
Okay, so with regard to the special guardianship, we have a policy which I can send you the link for if you'd like, which sets out. We always consider whether there is a requirement for a financial package, which is along the lines of our foster care allowance minus universal credit and child benefit. So there's some clear criteria set out there, which is all in the policy, and it would be means tested and then reviewed. There's a different rate for children of different ages, recognising as those children go up in their care that their needs change, etc., etc. So it is always considered, yes. With regards to your second question about transfer to adult services, so any child that's been in our care up to the age of 18, whilst they leave our care, they receive a leaving care offer from us. Not all children that are in our care or open to us are meet the criteria or threshold for an adult social care service. We, from the age of 14, if we identify that we think a child will need that, we make that referral and start to work with adults. We, I think, historically have been concerned about some of the transitions to adult services. We have regular meetings with adults to flag any children we're particularly worried about, particularly those that are age 16 or 17, and we're working really closely with them to try and improve that transition through to adults for those that will require a service.
That's good to hear. Just a small point. If I could have that link, I'd very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, members, thank you. Okay, we are at 12:50, near enough, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 items left. There will be a couple of them that they will be very short, but members, I will do my very best to move us on. The next one I think we can deal with relatively quickly, but we move on then to item 9 of our agenda, which is the Regional Adoption Agency Joint Scrutiny Group. Members will remember that we've had this is the second, maybe the second time that it's come back, and we could probably have one of the things that we would be discussing. We didn't have the minutes or the notes from the previous meeting, and kindly Councillor Nicholson substituted for me at the meeting. One of the outcomes for the meeting was the fact that the terms of reference wasn't necessarily fit for purpose and was looking to be rewritten. And there were a couple of other points that we wanted to do there. Claire, since then there's been a thing. Do you want to present your bit, and then we'll see whether this is a recommendation that we can get to quickly.
Not quite sure you're present. I can explain that the Regional Adoption Agency has a operational board and a strategic board, which looks at the functioning, if you like, in terms of the number of children going through that process and the funding for that process. The strategic board has councillors on it. They tend to be lead members of Children's Services. There was a query about whether lead members should continue to sit on that board, and it has now been agreed that at least until the scrutiny function is effective, the scrutiny function not having met for the last 2 years, until very recently, that lead members will continue to sit on that board. So it would be helpful to have some greater scrutiny of what the scrutiny function is doing. It's a joint scrutiny function against the whole of the Regional Adoption Agency area, which is led by Devon. So it's Devon, Somerset, Plymouth, Torbay, Cornwall. Cornwall, yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, it was the funding thing, wasn't there? There's an issue over funding that's been clarified. Is that what we said earlier?
The issue is about lead members sitting on the strategic board, and that has now been resolved, at least for the period going forward until we're clear about the scrutiny function.
Thank you. So just for clarity, members, the region we're bringing to we presented the minutes there. The suggestion is that we form a subgroup. We had I had a conversation at the pre-meet. We form a subgroup to look at the terms of reference and also to formulate our response. There was a suggestion that, as Councillor Nicholson sat on the attended the meeting and was instrumental previously, that we have a small subgroup made up probably of the chair, the vice chair, Councillor Nicholson, and with input from the executive director and the executive member, with a view to formulate a response that we could then circulate to the committee. Are you happy that happens? Thank you. So that meets that objective. Yes. Thanks. Yeah, okay, thank you. So that's item 9 done. We move on then. Item 10 of our agenda is a feedback of our the external placements Recommendations, task for this group, recommendations to executive. There.
Yes, this is a report that's been requested several times, I think, and I'm sorry that it's taken this long to provide it. So I have just provided in this document an update on the recommendations for the original task and finish group. You can see there that the first point was around that the task and finish group requested we enhance their own capacity for homes in Somerset. When I wrote this report about 3 weeks ago, we had 5 homes open, we now have 7 homes open in Homes and Horizons. And we are continuing to look at alternative ways of delivering children's homes in Somerset, such as through social capital and joint ventures with other local authorities, but we are still at an early stage of development for those. The recommendation was that we didn't make any more placements in homes which weren't registered with Ofsted. We completely accept that, it is illegal. But as you've seen in the finance presentation, and the graph in here is taken from that presentation, we have had to use unregistered provision because there is not sufficient provision nationally or locally for those children. Those numbers are coming down. In this graph, it was at 5. As I've said, with those 2 homes opening in the last 2 weeks, we've moved 2 children from unregistered provision into registered. Well, it's not yet registered with Ofsted, but will be registered provision in Homes and Horizons. And a further child who's in unregistered provision is moving this week to a registered provision, so it will take it down to 2. Our aim and our ambition is always that there'll be no children in unregistered provision, and we work very hard to try and reduce the numbers in there, so with the aim of getting that down to 0. But we do need sufficient accommodation for our children that is registered to be able to do that. The recommendation around block contracting, that basically means what we are, a block contract, for people who don't understand that, is saying to a provider, we will buy a number of beds in your provision, we will pay for them all, whether there are any children in them or not, on the basis that we will work with each other to try and fill all those beds at the price that we've agreed. We are doing some block contracting. It's not the best way of working in terms of cost, because Ofsted have requirements that you have to match children against each other. So if we have a 4-bedded children's home with an external provider, we pay for all 4 beds. We put 2 children in, and then the provider says, "Oh, hold on a minute, we can't match any two other children to these children because they're too complex." We continue to pay for 4 beds because we paid for 4 beds, but we can't use them effectively because of the needs of the children who are in there. So in terms of value for money, that's not necessarily good value for money. But on the other side is if you swap purchase, which is buy a bed, effectively, you're beholden to the market. And there are quite often, the BBC article this morning said, 40 local authorities buying for 1 bed. So it's a race to the top sometimes. Whereas a block contract, the benefit of that is you've got a set price that you've agreed in advance, and that's not going to change, and those beds are available to your authority. So we do block contract with some providers. We're looking at it in specific situations, but there are pros and cons to it, so we have to balance it out in terms of the market and how it works at the moment. The issue around referring to placements rather than children and reporting on work to support children, that was agreed, and that continues to be normal practice. If you identify that we're not doing that, please let us know. We may make mistakes. And the last point was about lobbying government through the LGA for better support councils about in terms of forecasting and impacting planning. So under the previous government, as we said, Children's Services nationally did lobby the government through the ADCS, which is the Association of Directors of Children's Services, and via the LGA, and we are waiting for further policy direction from the government. You'll see in the press lots of things probably about the government talking about possibly capping the cost of residential care, or something being done in relation to the private equity providers who are making vast amounts of profit out of children. But there is no current policy on it. It's in development, but we haven't been told what's going to happen yet.
Thank you. So the reason for this bringing back members is obviously to close the loop. We identified the issue. We did the task of the finish group. Obviously, it's still an ongoing issue, but we're at least with the response, we're able to close the circle. So, are there any points or questions for the? Okay.
I was just going to just quickly, Chair. So, in summary, yeah, I mean, what you've done, the fact where you used it down to 1 unregistered provider is to be congratulated and well done. So, but as I say, we talk about a national thing several times today. This is a national issue, and are we saying that the government needs to step up and help us? Wasn't meant to come across quite that way.
Okay, there is a national crisis in the availability of homes for children, both in fostering and residential care. And the residential care market is being increasingly driven by private equity. There needs to be a national response to that issue.
And it's been acknowledged that that's the case when you had the Children's Commissioner making it perfectly. One of the statements he made probably 18 months ago now was clear. It's wrong for private investors to benefit from children's bad situations and children that suffer from neglect or abuse. So it is known, and it was something. And the problem you had is the fact that a lot of some private equity firms have identified the fact that they buy children's homes, they can make money from it, and that's one of the biggest problems. So yes, it is something that's aware. And you.
Yeah, just very quickly, I mean, is it one or two that we've got on unregistered now?
So there are currently 5 because the 2 who are, sorry, there are currently 5 sort of on the books, if you like, because the 2 have moved into Homes and Horizons homes, but they're not yet registered with Ofsted, so they still count as unregistered. But if you take those 2 out, that's down to 3, and a further child is due to move this week from unregistered into a private provider's registered provision, so it'll be 2.
Right, so basically, if we was to finish our 8th Homes and Horizon house, or at least one of the annexes, we could possibly clear the children out of unregistered homes. So I think that's got to be a big push.
The point is very well made. So in closing this, one of the points it's important to thank the circle, to acknowledge the work that's been done to do this on so many different levels in so many different ways. So thank you for that, and thank you for the feedback, Claire. Okay, item 10 then. Item 11 then is feedback from our standing panel for education standards, and our representative, our lead on that is Evie, my vice chair, and she'll give us a verbal report on it. Thank you.
I think someone else was supposed to give an overview of what we do on this committee. One of the set of things that we look at are the statistics, how we perform within the schools, the students, different age groups, etc. A lot of they're data driven, but also we get to have visits from schools or presentations. So the first thing that we had this week was the academisation process pipeline. So we didn't have a meeting during August. Our September meeting took place on the 12th. Liz Smith, Education Relationship Manager, and Tina Govia, Senior Project Manager, presented this item. So just briefly to give you an overview, the legal status regulated by the Academies Act 2010, which enables the schools to convert to academy status if they wish. There is, however, no requirement for LA maintained schools to academise. This was dropped in 2022. It is now a choice, and it's supported by Somerset Council. There are currently 268 schools in Somerset. This went up by 2 with the opening of schools in Martock and Misterton. 154 academies, that's 57%. 100 have elected to convert, and 20 multi-academy trusts. The key steps to applying is to express an interest. A region's team member will talk through your options and commonalities of your other educational settings that may fit best. These discussions will usually include topics such as identity retention and what budgets may look like. The next stage is consent from governors, leads, and the mats they want to join. And also, in some cases, if it's a church school, the diocese. The Section 5 consultation includes parents and notifications of school conversions. An academy order then could take weeks and months to approve to enable the final steps. The council's duties include the 2P consultations, staff transfer, local transfers and commercial transfers. Fun facts, the most popular time to convert is in September, and Somerset team have completed over 140 conversions. Recent changes saw a shift in the drive for put the teeth back in. Recent changes have seen a shift in the drive for academisation and financial incentives to do so. Apologies, I couldn't write the financial impacts on the council down quick enough. It's quite difficult with the slides and amount of information there. The meeting, we also had introductions from 2 multi-academy trusts. They were ACE Academies, presented by Cheryl Wakeman, the CEO of Academies of Character and Excellence, accompanied by 2 staff lead roles, and the Oak Partnership Trust, presented by Ian Robinson. The ACE Academies thrived to be an exceptional trust. Their growth boomed within the Torbay and Exeter areas before encompassing Somerset schools. Schools in their trust include Holy Trinity Church of England Primary School in Taunton, Ash Hill Community Primary School in Ilminster, Wincham Primary School, Castle Kerry Community School, Buckland St Mary Church of England in Chard, Hatch Beecham Church of England in Taunton. The established group has 17 academies under their wing. ACE's ambition is to be an exceptional trust that receives a tailored curriculum to help deliver this mission, which the CEO describes as being a curriculum for excellence. They truly believe that people are the most important resources within their system. They are proactive within the community to encourage their children to be healthy thinkers and curious explorers within the community. The well-being of all and promoting characters in the school is centre of their vision, and the trust is proud to include the families within these circles and creations. Finally, from the ACE Academies, they believe one head teacher is as important as another, and they are forefront in being part of the solutions for supporting one another in their roles. Lastly, we have the Oak Partnership Trust, which brought a slightly different perspective to the table, where it's balanced between an overview of difficulties they have faced and the positive relationships they have within the schools and their communities. Their visions and values are to be an inclusive community which inspires a passion for knowledge and courage and confidence to fly. I'm going to be honest and open and admit that I usually struggle to concentrate in long online meetings, but found the CEO's candid and brutal honest approach really kept me captivated. The Oak Partnership Trust was formed in 2019, is made up from 4 primary schools and 2 special schools. 5 are in Taunton, and their latest joiner, Hillview School, is in Martock. Some of the school figures show a downward trend. English is maintained, and they currently have a clear focus on the maths and writing. The CEO has some great visions, which he's passionate about working towards. This includes nursery sufficiencies and the next steps into the trust, where he describes a reimagination of needs of the whole system solutions. You can tell the CEO is big on relationships with pupils and staff, and important relationships in keeping the identities of the schools within their communities. Ian's comments on the strong bond they have with the Bath and Wells diocese, you could see the passion there, and the diocese played a vital role in the formation of the new educational centre in Misterton. Admitting that he has an ambition for drive and for big outcomes, he says the schools are sometimes held back because of the delays and barriers for getting the right support for the individual children. The school values the emotional and social relationships of their children as well as their education, where they want the children to thrive and grow and have the tailored experiences to suit all needs. The next meeting is due to take place on 13th of November, and everyone is welcome.
Thank you, Evie. Thank you for that feedback. Just to explain that the officer that was going to feedback, he wasn't able to join us today. So thank you for that. What I will ask though, just to clarify, are the notes from the meeting shared with all members, or is it just? Okay. Yeah, well, what I'll do, I'll ask for the notes from the meetings for the standing panel to be shared, so the members can at least have a look at them and feedback. One of the interesting things in there is, as Evie's indicated, one of the decisions that was taken early is to try and put a face to some of the academy trusts that are out there, and it's not often that they get the chance to speak to the councillors, but also to feed in. It's also good to put a face to the academy trust, and that's one of the things that I found useful. You can put a face to a name, and now as some of the multi academy trusts, the mats are growing in size. It's interesting to see that. Claire, did you want to add anything else to that one? Okay. Thank you again, and thank you, members. There are no questions. Okay, moving on then. Item 12 of our agenda is has been asked to put on for our information, and I'll let Claire speak to it in the short term, but and then we can have a conversation afterwards.
Okay, thank you very much. So my misunderstanding, Chair, when I said this was the report for the audit committee, it isn't the report for the audit committee, sorry, I misread it. So this was to be presented by Amelia Walker, who's the Service Director for Education, who sadly is off sick today. So we agreed that we would present the audit findings for the Education, Health and Care Plan payments report, which we asked SWAP to look at. So I had requested that audit on the basis that we'd had a lot of complaints from parents about delays in the EHCP payments process and also the EHCP process in terms of the parents being able to see that the process was happening in a timely way. We also had a lot of responses from the local government ombudsman, where parents have made, largely parents have made complaints, and they have been found in their favour in relation to the council's performance, in relation to education, health care plans. So those things come together really in terms of the outcomes that the LGO has found, and also the outcomes of this audit. So we have shared the findings of the audit with the LGO, as you can see here, and they are satisfied that our findings are accurate, or the SWOT findings are accurate, and the recommendations in terms of what needs to happen are appropriate. So in this very brief report, it sets out there what the audit found. So this is all, it's difficult to understand this language, isn't it? But I'll try and make it simpler. So the process for assessing a child in terms of an education healthcare plan. So what happens is the process for assessment, a child's plan is issued, and then after that, there are some processes that go on to make sure that whatever the plan has said the child needs is actually in place in terms of both the resource and the funding for that resource. So that first point there about the post-approval requires enhancement to improve its operational effectiveness basically means that it's not working, and we need to do something differently to make sure that children and schools are getting the right resources and the right funding at the right time. Data is not always up to date, complete and accurate. We recognise that that's an issue in terms of the data on our systems. It's not always accurate or up to date. There are several systems, it's not 128 like there are in health, but there are several systems in the education system which record and report data. They're not always aligned effectively. We are looking at trying to have one system, to put everything into one system. And we're working with IT on the feasibility of that and the cost of that, the timescale of that at the moment. Outstanding vacancies and limited training for new staff. There is a high turnover in that team, and there's some work going on to look at what it is that means that job is so difficult to retain people in, and to improve both the training and the induction for new staff. And then the performance information, there is no current way to drill down into how each individual member or team is performing in terms of timeliness of those assessments being completed. And that's obviously a failure of the management system in terms of we have not prioritise that, so we can't see which particular staff or teams need more support to be able to do things in a timely way. So Amelia's recommendation here is that we share the full audit findings in terms of the full report for the next scrutiny committee in October, so that you can see what the audit said in detail, and at that point Amelia would be able to give you an update on what's been completed and the actions that there are going forward. Sorry for this understanding.
So just to get it right, so the service asked the audit partnership to review. Haven't we looked at it previously before?
In terms, so I asked the SWAP audit to review the payments process in terms of the EHCP, so Education Healthcare Plan payments, in terms of payments for the resource that needs to be provided to schools, and also sometimes there are individual payments to parents to provide particular aspects of that child's education. So I asked that audit to be done because I could see that there was a significant problem in the number of complaints I was getting, but that related to two different services. So it related to both the creation, if you like, of the plan and how that was disseminated in children's services, but also related to the way that the financial payments process was being delivered in the finance directorate. So SWAP were able to look across both systems to say, what is it that's causing this problem? Has it been resolved, or are there issues that continue to arise? And most of the issues they see are related to children's services.
Thank you. Marcus?
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, I mean, as much as I the thought of having to wade through it, I don't know whether it would be sensible for this scrutiny committee or members of this committee to have the SWAP report shared with them. I mean, it can make because then at least we've got full understanding of it before it comes back in October. And I suppose who's taking up? Presumably we're reviewing as a council reviewing them. Who's actually doing that work of reviewing them, and are we happy with what the audit report has said? And are we, I mean, are people arguing with some of their outcomes? Are we accepting it fully? And then who's reviewing and who's taking forward about changing those steps?
Right, we accept the outcomes. There's no concern about them. They are accurate. The service director, so Amelia Walker, who's the service director of education, will lead on the implementation of the actions and the recommendations in that report. The report will be reviewed through the audit committee as well in terms of the progress that has been made on the actions. For all top audits will go through the audit committee for evidence of progress.
So, okay, so just for clarity, so then the next meeting, before the next meeting, you're going to share the audit report. That's fine. And there's an action plan being put together, and that's the bit that we'll be scrutinising at the next meeting.
I think I would expect it to be a combination of the recommendations from the SWAP audit report and how they have fed into the action plan in terms of has the action plan reflected what the audit report said was required, and also any progress on the action plan.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Any other points or questions? Yes. So it's coming back.
So, one quick comeback because it says data is not always up to date, complete, and accurate. And I'm also just are we comfortable that when it wasn't accurate, that was an error and not deliberate?
I think so. I don't think anybody's deliberately trying to falsify records, and if they were, that's a disciplinary issue. I think it's a consequence of a high turnover of staff and staff vacancy. It's not an excuse. We need to get it accurate. It's not okay for children and their families. I think that's where it's come from.
Sorry. Yes, we will bring it back. Yes, that's fine. But just I'm confused. Sorry. An education, health and care plan (EHCP) involves 3 different bodies and the process. What were they looking at? Is it all of the bodies
So this audit, the one that's referred to here, looked at the payments process in terms of where an education healthcare plan recommended that there was a need for additional financial resource to support a child's education that either went to a school or to a parent, that I was aware that I'd had so many complaints about those payments not being made in a timely way. I asked for that audit to be done. So that's what that audit focused on, but it focused on these children's services elements, the education services element, and the finance services element in terms of processing the request for resource.
That helps because I read this the HCP process as in all of it. That's why I was going to get a little bit confused. Did you want to come in and say something? Thank you.
Yeah, just for clarity, really. So when you asked for that to be conducted, you were asking them to look at the personal budget, which outlines the education, health, and the social care contribution, plus any form of direct payment as well. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I look forward to seeing it at the next meeting. Francis.
And it also looks at payments to schools.
Yes, it would have looked at the payments to schools as a result of the education and healthcare plan request as well.
Thank you for the clarity. That's helpful. Okay. Members, any other further points or questions? Okay, item 13 of our agenda is the items for information. It just highlights the things that were circulated between meetings, maybe sometimes just for clarity for our new member, just to, sometimes there are things sent to the committee reports that are asked to note. And my philosophy is if it's just if it's a matter of reading something circulated between meetings, and then at this point, members get the opportunity to say, I've read that, and can we have a look at this or any other bits and bobs? Are there any other points or issues in relation to items 13? Thank you very much for the meeting. Meeting closed.